This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.
Welcome everyone to today's Environment Committee meeting. Thank you for joining us as we discuss the important topic of swimmable rivers. This is the second meeting in a three-part investigation exploring the Mayor's commitment to developing a bold plan for swimmable rivers within the next 10 years. We'll also consider how the Mayor can collaborate with partners across London to improve water quality and enhance river accessibility for all Londoners. I'm excited to announce that as part of the Swimmable Rivers investigation, the committee has launched a call for evidence and a survey. Our aim is to gather valuable insights from both expert organisations and the general public regarding the Mayor's proposals. We truly value your thoughts and experiences and we invite you to contribute. For more information and to participate, please visit the investigation page on the committee's website at london.gov.uk/swimmable-rivers. Before we get started, I have a few housekeeping items to address. I'd like to remind everyone to please switch their phones to silent mode. I also ask members and guests to position their electronic devices away from their microphones. Also, please adjust your microphone so you can be heard clearly. If you need to adjust your microphone, remember to lift it from the base. That's a lot of microphone administration. Members of the public are encouraged to follow at London Assembly on X and to use the hashtag Assembly Environment for this meeting. Other platforms, of course, are also available. Now, I have a few items of business to cover. Could I now ask our committee officer, Sal Fazal, to confirm any apologies for today's meeting?
Thank you, Chair. Apologies have been received from the Deputy Chair, Assemblymember Cooper.
Thank you, Sal. Can I ask the committee to note the recommendations set out at item 2 and ask if members have any other interest to declare? Thank you very much. Can I ask the committee to confirm the minutes of the meetings held on 6th of November and 4th of December 2024 to be signed by me as a correct record? Thank you very much. Can I ask the committee to note the completed and ongoing actions arising from its previous meetings and the additional correspondence received and sent?
Noted.
Thank you very much. Now moving on to today's main item of business, thanks for your patience. We'll be discussing swimmable rivers. Today's discussion will be divided into two panels. The first panel will specifically focus on a swimmable Thames. I'd like to welcome our guests participating in this discussion. We have Grace Rawnsley, Director of Sustainability and Net Zero Transition, Port of London Authority. Welcome back, Grace. Chris Roma Lee, co-founder of Studio Octopi, Thames Baths, Future Lidos and Swimmable Cities Alliance. Welcome. And Marlene Lawrence, founder of Teddington Blue Tits. I'll start with you, Marlene, and work across. It's the same first question to you all, which is the Mayor has committed to putting together what he's called an ambitious plan to make rivers in London swimmable within 10 years. What's your response to this, Marlene? And have you had any engagement with the Mayor and GLA around it already?
Hello, everyone. My name is actually pronounced Marlena.
Oh, apologies,
so
Marlene.
That's fine. I will always say that the river is swimmable. The river is used by a wide variety of people. In the summer, families come down to Ham. It's affectionately known as the Costa del Ham in the summer. We swim mindfully because we realise it's a moving body of water. It has rivercraft and other river users, very different from an enclosed body of water. So I am very keen to promote swimming in the river. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. And thanks, Marlena, very much noted. Chris.
Hi there, thanks so much for having me here. So I've been working on ways of getting into the Thames and making it swimmable for everyone for about 10 years now, under the disguise of Thames Baths and through our architectural practice, Studio Octopi. So this is a really big moment for me to be sitting here, because for 10 years I've been dreaming that we can have this dialogue with the Mayor. It is London's largest public space and probably the least accessible public space. And the ideas and thinking around Thames Baths centres on getting better access to that space. So I've had an ongoing dialogue with the Mayor, well, indirectly, I suppose, through the Royal Docks team. The Royal Docks is a perfect place for a floating pool, which I think we'll talk about a bit later. But I've also had some dialogue about access to the Thames over the years, off and on, as and when we found sites. So I have quite a body of evidence and knowledge around this topic.
Excellent, and thanks for being here. And finally, Grace.
Thanks very much, Zach. So my name is Grace Ronsley, Director of Sustainability at the Port of London Authority. Now, swimming isn't necessarily my area of expertise, so I'm going to leave that to the colleagues here. But I think we definitely welcome the Mayor's focus on making rivers as clean as possible. So that's certainly something that we're very interested in. And we have been working very closely with the GLA over the past 10 years on exactly that subject matter. So some renewed focus on this is really exciting for us, and we're very keen to work with the Mayor on the plans as they develop. What I would say is that we are the managers and the custodians of the tidal Thames, so that's Teddington out into the estuary. And whilst we permit swimming in kind of up the kind of western end of the river from Putney up into Teddington Lock, we do so. We don't encourage it, and that's because it is a tidal river. We have a lot of safety concerns within that river, and so we would say that swimming needs to be done in a very, as Marlena put it, mindful way by experienced swimmers who know what they're doing. So we do have safety concerns. Anything below Putney is prohibited because it is just too unsafe to swim.
Thank you. And the PLA has signed an agreement with the Mayor, or a pledge to work together to clean London's waterways. What exactly does this involve?
So we want to be part and parcel of the progress around the plan that the Mayor is putting forward to clean up the waterways as much as possible. And we want that because we want the river to be as healthy as possible, to be as biodiverse as possible, to support as many habitats and species as it can, and as well as having excellent water quality as well. So that's why we signed that pledge.
Thank you. Assembly Member Roberts.
Thank you and good morning. Hello. This is a question for Marlena and possibly for Grace. Let me see. So the Mayor has identified locations at Teddington and Albany Reach on the Thames as possible locations for future open water swimming sites. So what's your view about the suitability of these sites? I appreciate, Grace, you probably won't be able to comment on Albany Reach because it's way out of your purview.
Yes, I know both areas very well. I think Teddington in particular is highly suitable. We swim, the Teddington Blue Tits I founded almost 4 years ago. And before that, I'd only ever swum in swimming pools. And then during lockdown, when everything shut, I just thought, where am I going to swim? And then a friend who volunteered with Teddington RNLI said, why don't you try the first non-tidal bit in Teddington? It's really beautiful, it's wide, it seems safe. Lots of other river groups, water groups are using it now, and I did, and I loved it. And the group has steadily grown to just under 1,800 members now, without me promoting it at all. We swim mostly in the stretch from half-mile tree on Lower Ham Road to Burnell Avenue, which is a 1 kilometre stretch. We mostly get in by the Hawker Centre in Kingston. That has lots of parking. The facilities at the Hawker are available to us to use: toilets, cafe, emergency services should we require them. That is right next to the river where we swim. Where we get in is a large concrete pontoon. Lots of other paddle boarders and people use that as well. So it's a safe access to get in, and then where we get out sometimes at Burnell Avenue, that's also accessible for parking. It's a lovely, lovely stretch of river. I think it's highly suitable.
Mm-hmm. Albany Reach?
Albany Reach, lots of our members swim there as well. I tend not to, simply because I run the group from Teddington, but Surrey Outdoor Swimmers swim from Albany Reach. There's a little beached area there. I don't know how easy it is for parking and what other services are offered nearby, but I have comfort knowing that my members, if they wanted to use the YMCA facilities, they can. That's open from 7 in the morning till 9 at night. Mm-hmm. We don't often swim any earlier than that, but I do full moon swims where people know they can park safely and get to the river, literally riverside.
Excellent, thank you. Grace, you don't have to if it's not an area.
It was just really to clarify that I believe that the Teddington site is actually outside of our jurisdiction that is being proposed, so we wouldn't have any kind of strong views.
That's perfect. Marlene, if I may just, you mentioned in an interview with Living Magazine that you think men can be quite reluctant to enter into the water. Why do you think that is? And can you give us some idea of your 1,800 members, the gender balance?
We have quite a few men in the group, but lots of park runners, lots of people walking dogs see us swimming, and we always say, welcome, come and try, because they always ask, you know, why are you doing this? And we say, it's just great. It makes you feel wonderful connecting with nature. And they think, oh, don't know, my wife is keen, but I'm not so. I just think women seem to be more open to trying something new. But the men that have come love it and keep coming back. So I'd love it if more men did come. And slowly but surely more are joining.
Sounds good. One further question, of course, the issue on everybody's mind regarding Teddington is the Thames Water Direct River Abstraction Scheme. What impacts do you think that will have on
well, we've been demonstrating against that since we first heard of it nearly 2 years ago now. We started a petition. The petition is over 30,000 signatures now with change.org. Thames Water have listened to our objections at their consultations and have changed their plans. So what they're planning to do is build a water abstraction site exactly where we swim, which in times of drought would pump up to 75 million litres a day to the east end of London, to the Lee Valley. They were also planning then to put back a discharge unit exactly where we swim as well, piping treated effluent from Mogden. Since we've been demonstrating, they have now changed that to pipe back effluent at Isleworth. But they said they would, and the sweetening flow would go back through Isleworth water. So basically, they're going to build this site, and it would be used, they say, once every 2 years, where they would put back treated effluent. But to take out river water, for me, is nonsensical. I think there are better alternatives open to Thames Water, but they are pushing this forward because they say it is their cheapest option to tackle the water shortage.
Thank you. And do you feel there's enough support being given to you from City Hall in general, and the Mayor in particular, and the Deputy Mayor?
I'd like the Mayor to be more vocal in his support of what we basically want to stop Thames Water. We don't want them to do this at all. We think it's harmful to the river. We think it's harmful to the environment to take out river water in the summer months, in drought, when the river is at its most dire state, really. I think it's wrong.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair. No further.
Thanks. Assemblymember Tyrrell.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning and Happy New Year. So starting, going to Chris first on this, is that what infrastructure is needed for swimming safely in the rivers?
This is a really interesting topic for me as an architect and had worked on new swim sites and existing swim sites. I think what's really important to remember here that infrastructure for swimming can be as little as a ladder or a ramp to enable someone to safely get into the river. But it could also be at the other end of the scale, a floating pool. And I think a lot of the discussion at the moment is perhaps centred around the safety of getting into the river. But as Grace has already pointed out, it's not safe to get into the central London section of the river, and I've never advocated doing that. But there are ways of accessing water through sensible and innovative infrastructure, and that is, I guess, some of the stuff I've been pushing in our projects, that it is possible to get into the central London section to swim just on the water, not in the water.
Did you have anything to add to that, Marlene?
I frequently swim in the summer months from Kew Bridge to Hammersmith. I've swum as far as Putney. We do it mindfully as part of a small group. We're very visible in the water. We wear bright hats. We have tow float bags. My swim group in Teddington also always has a tow float bag, and we wear bright hats. We need to be visible because there are several rowing organisations there who, scullers and fours, don't look behind as often, so we often have to shout. So being visible is imperative, really, for safety.
Thank you. And then going back to Chris, I'm afraid. Are there additional facilities such as showers, changing areas, things like that can help make open water swimming more comfortable and accessible, in your opinion?
Yeah, absolutely. And through many of my sort of travels and visits to European places, Basel in Switzerland probably sticks out as a real inspiration, and I would encourage the mayor to send me there to have a look for him. But they have a wonderful infrastructure along the edge of the river, which makes it safe to enter at certain points. They have showers and changing rooms and toilets all along the riverbank, and it's an essential part, I'd say. I mean, there's a location at Teddington where I've swam before, where it is a slippery, muddy entry point. And it's crossed my mind numerous times that actually, if you weren't a confident swimmer and you embarked on getting into this area, you could find it difficult to get out again. So, you know, part of this, I think, is about accepting that people are going to swim in locations like Teddington, and therefore providing the infrastructure to make it safe. Like, for example, there's nowhere to secure your bike when you arrive at the swim spot other than to the bench, which then limits the number of people who can sit and watch the swimming. So it's very simple pieces of infrastructure which can make a massive difference.
Thank you very much for that. And keeping with you, Chris, have you heard of a YouTuber called Ed Pratt by any chance?
I haven't. No. Should I look him up?
I'll happily share with the committee that Ed recently, about 5 months ago, did a Source to Sea challenge where he started at Thames Head and made his way down the river without leaving it, and ended up on the coast of Sheerness. So began wading, then a bit of swimming, and then ended up in the kayaking it. And during the challenge, he did various pollution tests in the water to test the health of the river at various points. And I just wondered whether you had any engagements with Mr. Pratt as someone with a platform to help promote this that could help raise awareness of the Thames as a potentially swimmable river.
I haven't, but I should.
Nothing further from me, Chair.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry, did you want to add something, Chris?
No.
No. Just picking up on that a little bit, actually. So we're hearing that in Teddington, for instance, that not enough men are swimming, but more people could always swim. But at the same time, I'm hearing messages, strong public safety messages here. How do you, or how should the Mayor balance that kind of encouraging people to get in the water and do this, but also not allowing it to become some sort of competitive sport, or even, you know, people challenging themselves to go into more and more dangerous water?
Going back to Basel, I inquired how it was safe for us to enter the river. The river was moving at the same pace that the Thames moves at. This was in May, so it was cold because it comes straight off the mountains. And the simple response from the person who took us into the river was, the knowledge is passed down through generations. This doesn't happen overnight. You don't suddenly decide it's safe to swim in the river. You pass the knowledge down through generations. And she said, we can read the river, we can read the water and understand when it is safe to take you in. And we acknowledge that it's moving incredibly fast now, but it's not too fast. And I'll be honest, it was quite a scary ride. Didn't need to swim. We were swept along, and there were gravel barges coming at us. And we were told to keep to the left and instructed where to get out. And it was a fascinating insight into swimming in a biggish river and a busy river and a fast-moving river. London is different. I don't deny that. You know, there's a lot of traffic in the central London section, but I think the interesting point there is about this sharing of knowledge and opening up and sort of doing away with the naysayers and the, you know, you have to accept that people want to get into the rivers. The cities are getting hotter. The cost of living is making swimming less and less accessible. Swimming pools are closing. Rivers and natural bodies of water are going to become increasingly sought out by swimmers and people wanting to cool down.
That makes sense.
Can I just add a
Yes,
couple
please.
of things there? We look at certain things before we get into the river. We look at the flow rate. So the flow rate is added to by rainfall. So we can go online and check what the flow is at cubic meters a second. We know that if it's over 100 cubic meters a second, we can't swim against it. So we know that's a one-way swim. So in that instance, we will get changed, leave our swim gear all in one spot, and then walk up for 500 meters and swim a one-way piece back. We look at the Thames live sewage map after rainfall to see if there has been any spills. We're affected by 5 different outfall centres near where we swim. The nearest one is at Kingston, which very, very rarely spills. I think the last spill was over a year ago. But then we've got Hogsmill and Esher that seem to regularly spill after any particular heavy rainfall. So we are mindful of those things. So people who don't swim in the river need to know these things, because you might get into the river and the river is a moving body of water and you'll be swept down. We're mindful that we'd never ever go further than Burnell Avenue, because then we've got Teddington Lock and the weir, and with the weir there's a danger of death. So although I'm happy to promote swimming in the river where we are, there are still concerns that you need to know a bit more before you can just get in.
That makes a lot of sense. And to come back, you've talked a few times about the benefits of being in an organised group. So you said safety, for instance, in terms of visibility. I'm
Yes.
also hearing from you there, presumably the spreading of knowledge rather than someone just kind of randomly getting into the water. Are there any other benefits to being in a more organised group? And then I'll come to you, Grace.
Yes, I mean, when people apply to join the Blue Tits, I always write to them personally and ask them why they'd like to join. And I would say over 90% have said it's to connect with people, it's to be at one with nature, it's to do something that seems so natural, it's all for their mental health. And I think in this day and age of increased social media, people connect more with their mental health. Especially going through lockdown, people have found that doing the simple things in life actually make you happy. and people find it joyous swimming in a natural body of water.
You're a very good advert for it. I feel like I want to go for a swim this afternoon.
Yes.
Grace.
I think I might be the slight downer on this one. I think that the messaging around this is really, really important, and I'm very much echo what my colleagues on the panel are saying. And when we first heard the headline that was put out there, and that's the journalists that have turned that into a headline, the swimmable Thames and swimmable rivers, it did cause us a bit of a because actually we've worked really, really hard over the last 15 years to reduce the number of deaths that we get in the Thames. Every year people die by going into the water in the tidal Thames. And so we are a founding member of the Tidal Thames Water Safety Forum, which is a group that involves the RNLI, the London Fire Brigade, the Metropolitan Police, and a number of other emergency services. And in 2023, I think there was 31 deaths in the tidal Thames from people going in when they shouldn't have gone in, or accidents, etc. 2022, I believe 109 rescues happened in the tidal Thames from people going in. And so, it's about that knowledge. It's about doing it in a safe way. And certainly in the tidal Thames, we would always be not encouraging that. But I think when we get headlines like swimmable Thames, it does mean that people think it's safe to swim in. And so it's really important to have that kind of messaging about how you do that safely.
Thank you. Assemblymember McCartney.
Thank you. My questions are to Chris, because I'm really interested in your idea for a floating Lido on the Thames. And I noticed in your written submission to us that you say you've been working on it for 10 years. It hasn't been easy. And you say that some river authorities are making it very clear they will never allow it to happen within their domain. I just wondered if you wanted to name and shame anybody.
Well, we did have a little chat beforehand, but I've had a number of meetings with the PLA, and I think it's fair to say that they've made it fairly clear that they're not in support of it. I think that would be the politest way of putting it. This was right at the beginning when I met the PLA, and we had a number of conversations about safety, and I keep reiterating, and I will continue to reiterate, that this is happening in many other cities. I think we'll get to that in shortly. And it is very much a floating swimming pool. It is not about swimming in the river. It is not safe to swim in the river, as Grace has pointed out, and I totally accept that in the central London section. But these floating pools are there are many ways of interpreting them, and they can be like the LSC pools in Helsinki, which is a big dock, sort of floating pontoon type thing with a chlorinated pool and a natural pool next to it, or they can be just some swimming lanes which allow you to swim actually in the river. So I think it's very clear about which way I think it should go in the centre of town. And we've done a lot of work towards that.
Thank you. And I've just been looking at the Plus pools in New York, and just seeing what they've been saying. They say they've just completed testing their filtration system at scale. They're starting to build the first pool, and then there will be more testing. So I'm sort of going to ask you, how feasible do you think it is, and what would be the timescale for actually having the technology that we need to actually make this a reality?
It's very feasible. I mean, Plus Pools have done amazing work. They've been going slightly longer than Thames Baths, and they have devised a filtering system which allows the river water to be filtered clean and then put into the pool and gently warmed. And as I understand it, they're friends of ours through the Swimmable Cities Alliance, which I've helped set up, that technology will be available to other cities, other bodies of water. So I think their mission is to do a test rig this summer and then launch the pool in the East River off Manhattan in the following summer. And that'll be a momentous moment because that is a similar river to London, to the Thames. and it'll be really interesting to see how that works. And it'll be interesting from the filtration point of view, but also from the safety aspect. How do you stop people going from the pooled deck into the river, which was one of the points which the PLA brought up with me from the beginning. We see this as a risk for people to actually get into the river from the pontoon, which I acknowledge, but I also say that if you've got a safe body of water, why are you going to put yourself at risk by jumping into a brown, fast-moving body of water? And I think it's about making the pontoon very safe in terms of it's difficult to get from one to the other. But I think this is all part of this journey about understanding how it could work and where it's safe. It's not going to be safe in all locations. And part of the challenge of Thames Bath over the last 10 years have actually been finding a site. We had some progress with a site outside Tate Modern, but then that wasn't supported by Tate Modern, so that unfortunately couldn't go any further. We had some very good progress at Barking Riverside, and then unfortunately that unravelled through COVID, and I think my understanding was the PLA weren't that keen. But the docks is something which I'm pushing a bit harder now, because that is an easy win, and that body of water out there, as I saw this morning, there was no boats, no swimmers, not even a duck was using that water, and a pool out there could bring to Newham, bring to London something really unique and a lot of activity, and is very much easier to achieve than in the Thames.
Yeah, I mean, out there, you do see people swimming in the summer, but I think you have to pay for it. And one of the beauties I think about what Marlene is doing is that there's no cost involved in terms of access. I mean, do you envisage your Lido being free of charge, or? Well, yeah, well, I think that there's then issues about who's responsible for running it, and I suppose who pays for it.
Yeah, no, I did want to get onto this actually, because we wrote a business plan 5-6 years ago where we realised that we could charge the same as it costs for the local leisure centre to charge swimmers. So the local community could access this at the same cost as swimming in their indoor leisure centre. It would be a not-for-profit, and it could work on that basis. We were told that we would be charged a considerable rent for the moorings on the Thames, which would need further negotiation, which slightly scuppered some of the business plan through that conversation. But I think the cost of swimming is a really critical issue, and I just did some quick looking at the cost of existing setup. So the Royal Docks here, you have to be a member of NAUCA, which is £15 a year, and then you pay £9 per swim. Whereas in the local Better indoor facility in Newham, you can swim there for about £5, non-members £6. So there's something a little bit wrong about this, and I think this is something the Mayor needs to bear in mind as he progresses through this, is that I don't think the route is charging people an annual membership fee and then a cost to swim there, which is greater than the leisure centre. That isn't going to get people into natural water and benefiting from all that brings. The Serpentine, Marlena and I both swim there. That has an annual membership of £40, which is, and then we can swim every morning between 5:30 and 9:30 in the morning. That's not for everyone, but there's an opportunity there to increase the access to that Lido. So I'm interested in this because the cost of living is bringing a crunch on things, and having certain financial models is not encouraging people to swim. And we need as many people as possible to be swimming in Lidos and in outdoor natural bodies of water, wherever it is, to reduce the impact on the NHS as much as keeping us all mentally fit and healthy.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I think you make a really good case there, Chris, and specifically for Newham, I guess it's sometimes my job to ask obvious questions. But why is it so important as well that this is accessible to everyone and isn't kind of just, for people who are wealthy enough to go swimming?
Well, I think I wrote a figure down here about the saving to the National Health Service is something like £350 million a year by having people actively swimming. If I remember correctly from previous conversations, Newham has below average number of pools in the borough, and yet they're sitting on a massive body of water, which could have a really exciting, innovative pool, which would get people swimming. Part of the thing about Thames Baths was that this would be a really unique place to swim, meaning that it would attract both tourists at perhaps a higher fee, but also kids who see it and go, I just want to go swimming. This is magic, and get their first taste of swimming on the river. And frankly, swimming on the river or in the river was where it all started. Before there were bathhouses and pools and leisure centres we know now, the only place to swim in London was in the river. And a lot has changed. We've built the embankments out, we've built the bridges, which has made it more dangerous. So it isn't safe to jump straight into the central London section. But the long heritage of swimming in the river is there, and it got people swimming.
And that's an interesting model too, the idea that you charge tourists a little bit more and that subsidises it.
Yeah.
You may not be able to share this publicly, but the Tate Modern, were there objections? Is there a reason you can share in terms of why they said we don't?
We had a meeting shortly after the Borough Market bombings, and I think there was a lot of sensitivity around the community around that area, whether there was a community who would use it. I pushed back a little bit on that because I thought actually this is exactly the place where it would be a suitable location, because you have tourists, you have people living there, you have people working there, and we've spoke to Tate about it being a partnership, that maybe they would do the F&B, the food and beverages, that the deck of this structure could be covered in the winter. It could have a temporary pavilion such as the Serpentine Pavilion designed for it. It could have sculptures, artworks on the pavilion. That actually this is more than just swimming. It's a public space, and we should probably revisit it. But Thames Bath has been unfunded since the crowdfunder, so it is we have to manage our time correctly on it, otherwise it's...
Well, hopefully there's a conversation that the Mayor may want to get involved in with too. Grace.
Can I just say that when the PLA assess applications across the river, we do so in a kind of way that requires us to have enough information about a scheme that allows us to assess the environmental impact, the impact on the riverbed itself, and the Conservancy is making sure that it doesn't change the flow of the river in a big way, as well as any navigational concerns as our kind of primary role as the Port Authority. And so we're very happy to work with any applicant on a project to understand what some of those constraints and concerns might be. So I would, just say, please come to us with your proposals, and we can help assess and understand what exactly it is that we might be concerned about, or whether or not we think that's the right location. But we need that sort of specificity. It has to be applications have to be kind of quite well developed for us to be able to assess whether or not they can go ahead.
Thank you very much. I want to move on to bathing water quality. If I start with you, Marlena, so what would you like to see in terms of how we can clean up London's rivers? What do you think a plan should look like?
Well, the obvious solution there is for the water companies to stop spilling sewage into the water, really. That is the one thing that I would really like to stop. So they have to be more accountable, they have to be fined better, they have to be regulated better. Things have to improve, and I realise with the state of things now, it's going to be a slow road to improvement and recovery, but that ultimately has to happen. In the meantime, of course, we continue swimming. We just, as I've said before, have to do it mindfully.
Thank you. Chris, the same question. So what should a plan include to clean up London's rivers?
I think Marlena said it all, really. I don't think I need to add much, but I would just return back to my Thames Bath that we don't need to wait until the rivers are clean, because that is going to be a number of years. We can get better access to these rivers by being innovative and clever with how we do that.
Thank you. And Grace, you already have PLA already have a Clean Thames plan. How does this work, or how will it work in kind of coexistence with any new mayor's plan?
Well, I'm hoping that the mayor will be able to take a lot of information and expertise from that plan. We've had a Clean Thames plan. It was previously called the Thames Litter Strategy since 2014. We've been working on this for a long time. And we have, in 2023, we published what we call our Clean Thames Manifesto, which brought together the 3 water companies that discharge into the Thames, so that's Southern Thames and Anglian Water, as well as Ofwat and the Environment Agency, to put pressure and get an agreement from those 3 water companies to bring forward their targets on storm overflow discharges by 10 years. And so it was a really important step for us. And we were able to get that commitment from those water companies. And I think that kind of proves our kind of convening power as an organisation around some of these issues, because we are the custodian and the kind of owner of the riverbed, and so we have a right and a responsibility to advocate for it. Our Clean Thames plan, I think it's absolutely right that we should focus on sewage outflows as well. However, there are a lot of other ways that pollutants get into the river. So we've done a lot of work on the pathways that litter, microplastics, bacteria, etc., get into the river. It's not just sewage pollution. It comes from runoff from roads. It comes from simple things like not enough litter bins along the side of the river. It comes from, and those not being emptied enough. It comes from people's use of wet wipes and flushing them, misconnections. There's a whole raft of ways in which pollution gets into the river that we need kind of broad public support to tackle. So it's not simply just the water companies, although they are a big part of that picture. And we would encourage them and push them to move as fast as possible to reduce those sewage outflows. But it is that kind of wider picture of pollution that ends up in the river.
Thank you. We had Theo from Thames 21 in our last committee meeting, and he talked a lot about river runoff that echoes what you're saying. Absolutely.
And I think one of the things we'd really like to push for as part of the London plan as well is a focus on sustainable urban drainage systems. That's, a really effective way of keeping pollution back from river systems, storing water, filtering that pollution out. And as well as increasing the biodiversity in the green elements of London.
Yeah, and this comes back to what Marlena was saying as well about when people are swimming to their connection with nature, making sure that nature is fully considered in these plans.
Can I just add here as well? The stretch where we swim in Teddington is we love it because it's so clean. We can often see our feet below us. The water is so clear. We can see little fish swimming below us. We have seals swimming with us. A seal has popped up about 3 feet away from me before, looked at me and popped its head down. The river where we swim is relatively clean. It's very different from the tidal river. It's not grey or silty. In the summer, we do notice more litter, but we collect litter ourselves. We go out with black sacks and collect litter along the towpaths. If we see anything in the water, we pick it up and stuff it down our costumes and take it out. We swim there because it's a lovely, clean stretch of river. So.
Excellent, good to
hear.
Thank you. And in terms of how you assess that water quality, you've already said you can literally see it because you can see your feet or you can see the fish. Is there any other way that you collect information about water quality? And are there any things missing that you think this would be really helpful and necessary in order to assess?
Well, there are quite a few organisations that do water testing along our stretch. One of our members who volunteers with the RNLI has done 5 water tests last year. 2 of which were in good weather, and he was testing for E. coli, and the test came out good. But otherwise, after testing, after heavy rainfall, the E. coli levels were up. So we know that's because of sewage drops into the water. So again, we just use the information we have at hand to be mindful. We notice as well in the summer there are algae blooms, but they're just to do with plant life and the river being under stress due to excess heat and low flow, but they're not harmful to us in any way. But to look at it, you think, what is that floating along the river? But it's nothing. It's just algae. So we do swim daily.
Great to hear. Chris, our last investigation, we had a brilliant representative from SwimDem crew, and one of the things he referenced was just people get sick and this just happens. Is there more information that needs to be available, and what would you like to see more publicly available?
I think there definitely should be more information available, as we've talked about before. I think anything which informs people on the safety of swimming, be it water quality or otherwise. We swim in the Serpentine, and the Serpentine has an algae bloom problem as well. I've never quite got to the bottom of what the issue is there, because it's spring-fed. So in theory, the water should be replenishing. I don't know if you know, Marlena, how that's occurring, but it's quite a frustrating occurrence, because it is created by us indirectly, by runoff or overheating. It's a shallow man-made structure, but more information is key. I can't emphasize enough, and more places to swim. So when it's algae blooming in the Serpentine, where can I go?
And in terms
the river.
In terms of the form of, and this is to both of you, that would take, is that a case of checking a website? Is it an app? Is it information being posted along the, like, what would be the ideal?
I think, I mean, the obvious one is apps and websites, but I do like this idea, which I see in Europe, that you have stuff along the riverbank. So it is information points. We did a project for Sydney Water in Australia, about how to establish new swim sites in the harbour and the west of Sydney, and some of the conclusions from that were having emergency health sort of safety points added along the river sites, which sort of formalised some of the unofficial swimming sites, easier access to the water. But the point is, you're continually communicating to potential users of all abilities what the risks are, and how to avoid them wherever possible. I mean, I think one of the issues is going to be who's taking responsibility for all this, and I imagine, I mean, Marlena probably knows, the reason why no works have happened at the Teddington site about easing the access to the river. I think it's off the Meadow area. Is that the right place?
Yeah,
that's sort of muddy.
Yes, that's nearer to Burnell Avenue.
Okay.
But as I say, we mostly get in by the Hawker Centre, YMCA, because we're quite a large group now, and it's just easier access there.
But the council wouldn't do works to improve that access at the risk of encouraging people to enter the river, and this whole responsibility aspect of who is going to take liability. Because you're just going around in circles effectively. People, are risking themselves by getting in through a dodgy entry point. Yeah. But then the flip side is, if the council then improve that, you're encouraging more people in. And I think that whole structure of liability needs to be clarified.
Really helpful. Grace.
Yeah, just to say, we would really support kind of wide-scale water quality testing on all parts of the Thames. It's not just the swimmers that want that information. It's all the recreational river users. So we support a huge number of sports clubs in the kind of upper end of the Thames. And we provide a lot of funding to those sports clubs in order to kind of get better diversity and access to the river from London. And they want that information too, because they're concerned when they're out rowing, they're getting splashed back in the face, or somebody falls in. They want to know what they're entering as well. So it's not just the swimming groups that are interested in that information. It is quite a challenge to do water quality monitoring in an estuary. There obviously are ways of doing it, but because of the tidal flows, you get contaminants that move very quickly between places. And so there are a lot of companies that are currently developing technology that helps with that. And I know that the water companies are looking at that as part of one of their requirements under water quality monitoring as well. But the estuaries is kind of scheduled a little bit later because it's more complex, but we would definitely support that being done sooner so that those community groups and those sports clubs can get the right information about what they're entering.
Thank you. Assembly Member Mahfouz.
Thank you, Chair. Grace, I'm just going to stick with you about the water quality to start off with. So clearly one of the key benefits of what we're considering is improved water quality across the city. You talked about some of the partnerships that are in place, obviously working, whether it's sustainable urban drainage or whether it's mist connections, working obviously closely with the Environment Agency would be one partner. But do you feel that the right partnerships are in place to deliver that improved water quality across London?
I think so. I think that there are a large number of organisations that have been working on this for a long time. So we have a lot of NGOs that have done incredible work. We're very close partners with Thames 21, for example, who've done a lot of work on water quality within the Thames. And we work very closely with the Environment Agency, as well as some of the water companies that discharge into the Thames, and a number of other organisations that have interests. So I think the partnerships are there, and I very much welcome the GLA and the Mayor, putting some renewed focus on how to make those partnerships as successful as possible and have the biggest platform as possible to get some of that work happening. With all of these things, there's always the complication of jurisdictions and who's responsible for what. And I think that having a round table where we can discuss some of those issues would be really positive as well.
And do you feel, Grace, it's about the jurisdictions which is the main barrier to making improvements, or is it about if we have a clear direction and of travel of sort of what the goals are? Because you're clearly looking after the freight, for example, going along the Thames. Other players will have other priorities. Having the same goals might make that more focused. We
as an organisation have a responsibility to maintain the river environment as well. So that's part of the Port of London Act. So we have a very keen interest in making sure that the water quality and the river is as clean as possible. I don't think it's a jurisdictional issue necessarily. I think it's a complexity issue. So I think that the ways in which the river gets polluted is many and from various different sources. And so whilst you might have a lot of focus on one particular area, that's only going to do part of the story. It's a really big and complex system that needs a lot of different people involved and a lot of different partnerships involved. And whilst you might kind of deal with one issue, and then another issue is going to pop up. So I think it's a complexity of the ecological system more than a jurisdiction issue.
Thank you, Grace. Chris, I'm going to just come to you in terms of, you talked quite a bit, and obviously in your submission, but also today, lots of international examples: Helsinki, Basel, Sydney, New York. I'm just after the Christmas break, and now I'm already thinking, where can I go next? And certainly been to Switzerland, where the water there is absolutely pristine and beautiful. What other examples could you provide us? And obviously last year we had the phenomenal scenes by the Seine, obviously with the Paris Olympics. What examples could we learn from it here in London?
So as one of the organisations which I've helped set up, which is called Swimmable Cities, which is an international alliance of people like myself all over the world who are trying to get into urban water or increase access to urban water, we do have quite a comprehensive list of contacts, which we're more than happy to share. I think probably top of the list is Copenhagen, or Denmark in the sort of broader sense. Copenhagen and Aarhus in particular have harbour baths, and the story around those is something which I told Tideway twice, that was about cleaning up the Copenhagen harbour from an industrial disaster zone to one of the most attractive and successful cities in the world in terms of its water access as well, and they celebrated that by building these various types of harbour baths. Unfortunately, Tideway didn't quite see it like that, but that is the sort of that and Basel, I suppose, and the heritage around those. Those are the old, more established ones. Then there's the Badeschift in Berlin. There's another one in Vienna. The one in Vienna has a football sort of cage on top of the pool. So again, introducing other activities within it. In Paris, as you say, they're working on swim sites actually along the Seine, where you will actually be able to get into the river itself. But they also have the Bassin de la Villette, which is in the canals in the north of Paris. They have the Josephine Baker pool, which is a covered pool. Well, it has a retractable roof for a heated, treated, chlorinated pool floating on the river. They have the Annette Quay, which is an outdoor treated lap pool, probably more, 50-metre long pool. Gothenburg, Jubilee Park there, they have a pool which utilises the saltwater wedge. So it takes the clean salt water, which is below the polluted water which sits on top of it. Alice Sea Pool we've talked about in Helsinki Harbour. Serenga Baths in Oslo. It's going to be a busy summer for you. And then sort of live examples, I suppose, I've got here in the port in Quebec. They have put out pontoons and swimming lanes within that, so that is swimming again directly into the port. And just opened in Auckland Harbour a very similar scenario, which are probably both more appropriate for here in the docks. And then emerging, we've got conversations going in Bristol Harbour, Glasgow, Newcastle, and then back into Europe again. Part of the Swimmable Cities network is Rotterdam. They're building stuff in the docks there. Big Beach they're building. Flussbad, which is in Berlin. Vienna, they're trying to get into the canals. Amsterdam, the canals. Brussels. The Yarra in Melbourne. Budapest.
Sounds amazing. My mind is obviously drifting off. Swimming down a number of rivers to those locations. Chris, with your expertise and leading that Swimmable Cities group, is there a theme that runs through that says why these have been made possible that is perhaps missing here? Is there a sort of key ingredient?
Well, some of these are possible, some are coming through, but they all are centred around this idea of restoring the health of the river, as we've talked about. So it is only possible when you have a healthy ecosystem restored in the river. So it's I guess Swimmable Cities is about combining this need for us to get into access into natural water with our increasingly warmer cities and all of that we've talked about, but that is only achievable when you pair that with a healthy waterway. And so bringing the two together sort of produces a kind of beautiful poetry to it, and these are cheaper places to swim. Let's face it. You know, there's less concrete, there's less heating. There's less chlorine, all the things we should be really quite concerned about.
Brings me really neatly onto what I was going to ask you next, actually, which is around the cost. You've mentioned it in your submission around, I think so if I quote directly from your submission, the assumptions, this is of the organisations that you've applied to get your project off the ground around risk and cost are incorrect, is what you've said. A lot of the examples that you've given are Scandinavian nations, Switzerland as well, obviously all known for very high costs in those countries, and we've talked about affordability as being a key element of this. Clearly Marlena's group and a beautiful stretch of water that you go into there, it's what's really key to that as well is also that it's obviously absolutely free to be able to get into the water. How do we make sure that the proposals that we bring forward don't then become unaffordable swimming locations for the majority of Londoners?
I think the in my evidence I suggested that some of the numbers were incorrect for the Royal Docks here. But I think that possibly what happened there was just confusion over what actually was being conceptually put forward. I don't think there wasn't a drawn plan. It was someone who was discussing about what might be possible. Thames Bath as a heated, chlorinated, floating Lido on the Thames isn't cheap. I'm not going to sit here and tell you it is cheap. It isn't cheap, but I think you have to look at it beyond just the bottom line figure. It has to be looked at all the way through to what you're saving the NHS by getting community groups and youngsters swimming in it. But there are so many variations as to how you achieve that in different bodies of water That's the critical thing. So if you're looking at something to go into the central London section of the Thames, like Thames Bath, then that is in excess of 10 million to build a 50-metre pool floating on the Thames. But if you're looking at trying to ease access to the dock, it's a very different beast, and it's down into single figures, single millions, as opposed to multiple millions. And I think that is potentially where this whole thing is really complex. And all that list I just read to you, they're all totally different and different costs attached to them. So it's very easy to get the wrong end of the stick and close this out. And I think potentially what happened at the Royal Docks, from what I've heard, is that it got ruled out because it went off in the wrong direction with not enough information. So, I've said to multiple people in the Mayor's office that I'm happy to help wherever I can to clarify some of this through our expertise and knowledge, because I think we can't continue to refuse this. It's happening everywhere else, and London really needs to keep up with Paris and New York. I don't want to be left behind. I'm speaking as a Londoner.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thanks. I just want to pick up on this idea of not being left behind. If other countries are doing it better, you've mentioned a few of the obstacles already today. So liability was one of it, like a culture of liability problems. I don't know if disconnection from nature maybe in some areas where people are just not pushing for this enough. And also just through some of this conversation today, I feel like, this is our river, isn't all of us. It's a commons, it's public ownership. So the idea of paying for it at all should seem a little bit strange to us. Do you think there's a fundamental cultural difference here, or the story's just not been told?
It's a very good question. One of the things I read right at the beginning of my journey into Thames Baths was a book by Caitlin Davis called Downstream, A History of Swimming in the Thames. And that opened my eyes to what we had in the Thames and the significance of the Thames. And the more I read that, the more I observed what I saw along the Thames was over the years, particularly since the 1950s, that we've kind of turned our back on the Thames. It's lost its significance within London. A lot of it is used for freight and relies on larger vessels to use it, as opposed to Londoners getting access to it. There are complications, and I totally accept that. But I think we do have a chance to re-engage and reconnect with it. I mentioned Tideway earlier. That was, deeply frustrating to be knocked back twice. I think I understand it went twice to the board to be discussed about how potentially Thames Bath could be integrated into some of these constructions along the vent shafts along the Thames. But both times it got refused because it was risky, because it was dangerous. And I think we need to embrace this. And we see across the country bodies of water being fenced as a way of keeping people out, whereas actually we should be educating people and we should be getting kids swimming. Swimming should be part of the curriculum, full stop, non-negotiable. And then we wouldn't need to fence these waters, because people would be more safe and more aware of what is safe and what is not safe, and how to cope with falling into a body of water by putting increasingly higher fences around bodies of water, or making them inaccessible. Is only asking for trouble.
I think you make the point really well. The fences always upset me, not just because people can't get to the water, but you're literally fencing them away from nature as well and creating more of a disconnect.
Exactly.
Grace, earlier you mentioned that the PLA have worked with several sports groups. Do you have any kind of more details about what that work looks like, or would you be able to share with the committee afterwards some of that information?
Absolutely. I can definitely share. We can share with the committee, and we can probably put this in our evidence about the number of different sports groups that we've worked with. So we have a fund called the Active Thames Fund. We provide, since we established the Active Thames Fund 4 years ago, we've provided just under £500,000 worth of funding to sports groups up and down the river to support them, with a key priority of advancing inclusion and increasing diversity within those sports clubs to get more people that aren't necessarily accessing the Thames to access the Thames through sporting endeavours. So a lot of focus on young people, a lot of focus on vulnerable communities that aren't currently accessing the Thames. But we can certainly provide a kind of rundown of the key statistics for you and the different sports clubs that we have supported.
That'd be great. It's all part of the picture.
And I just wanted to come back on the kind of story of the Thames. And, you know, I think it's not just a swimming story that we need to tell more often about the Thames. I mean, it's such an incredibly important body of water for the capital. And it has a very diverse group of users that use it. It's the busiest inland waterway in the UK. It's responsible for carrying a huge amount of inland freight that takes about 140,000 lorry loads off of the roads of London. So it's a really important lifeline for the capital. The capital exists because the Thames exists. That's why it's here. And I do agree that we've somewhat turned away from it in terms of, it being, in the consciousness of maybe the kind of nature of London, but it is also a really important natural habitat and blue space that we have in London. And I think we need to tell all the stories that the Thames has to say, not just the kind of specific stories around swimming. It needs to be that iconic place, and I think it is, but it needs a bigger telling of that story.
Thank you. I'm going to come to Assembly Member Prince in a moment. I know Assembly Member Roberts wants to defend councils briefly, Faisal.
Thank you, Chair. And I suppose I should declare an interest at this point as leader of Richmond Council. So just on the idea that there's no infrastructure because the council's being risk averse, I mean, it could be that there's a degree of risk aversion, not least because we had a death in the river just 18 months ago with Brian Sazu. But there could be any number of reasons why. Infrastructure can't be put on the riverbank, metropolitan open land planning conditions, things like that, impact on the ecology of the riverbank itself and on the river, impact of encouraging greater numbers of people onto the riverbank itself could have a deleterious impact. So I just want to try to nail the idea that it's the council being risk averse. It's not necessarily that. It could be a factor, certainly could, but there are other factors in play. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Prince.
Thank you. Chris, I think, you've made some very good points. I think the issue around this part of the Thames, with a tidal range of around 7 metres, it isn't really very practical to do anything on the Thames itself. But I think in relation to the docks, there's masses of opportunity. And if we are going to focus on something, do you think that would be better to focus on the docks rather than the tidal river itself, which is very dangerous, actually?
Picking up on your point first, yes, the tidal range is challenging, shall we say, but it can work. It doesn't work in all locations, but it does work. We studied it with Beckett Rankin, the marine engineers, and there are locations which can accommodate a 50-metre by 20-metre structure, which would be outside the navigational channel, the protected route down the centre of the Thames. So it is achievable, but you're right. The docks is an easy win, and I've had, as I said, meetings with the Royal Docks team, and I think it's fair to say that we've all agreed it's an easy win, but the inaction on it has been frustrating, shall I say, because I think that the Royal Docks do an annual kids pool, and pure speculation is that there's a substantial budget for that every year, and actually that should be put forward into something more permanent. I mean, today I would have definitely swam out there today in a pool. But I think, the Royal Docks, the challenges are it's very deep, it's very cold because of its depth, and so that is why it would work better with a floating pool, which has a manageable depth to it. It could be heated. I mean, the Alice Sea pools in Helsinki is the prime example, and that was the cost. We got a budget cost for that. To do it here, and the benefits it would bring were are countless, really.
Just to nail that point again, it would be far more economical to do that in the docks rather than do it on a river with a 7 metre flow. Just move on to safety. I did a quick search, and the Mayor of London offers no advice on safety on swimming in the rivers, or any advice on swimming in the rivers, which is a bit strange, I would have thought. Can you tell me, do other cities offer advice around safety, and what do you think the Mayor should even now publish as advice to people in relation to safely swimming in our rivers?
I can't think of a specific example of another city which provides that advice other than what I told you about Basel. I think that I wrote a book about tidal pools around the world, which is not rivers, I know, but it is about these structures which were built, a lot were built in the 1930s to provide safe access to seawater. And they are free to access. Bude Sea Pool, for example, in Cornwall, is free to access, and it has a number of signs near it which give you all the risks and the dangers, and that is a way that the council manage that site. So I'm surprised there isn't any advice, even if it was don't do it. But I think this is all part of the story about adding extra knowledge and information out there.
Can I just?
Yeah, I was going to ask you both to come in. Actually, be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Port of London Authority, we have co-founded a group called the Tidal Thames Water Safety Forum, and through that we also have published a drowning prevention strategy, as well as guidance on our website about swimming in the tidal parts of the Thames that we allow swimming in. So we have all of that there for people to access, and it very much echoes what Marlena has said about trying to swim in groups, making sure that people know that you've gone swimming and that you've kind of got a plan of where you're going, understanding access points and egress points in particular. That's that point about the fast flow of the river. Sometimes people think they'll be able to swim back to where they got in and then they can't. So we have published that information for the tidal parts of the river.
I think that's very commendable, but I think it would be helpful if you could perhaps in your evidence suggest that the Mayor might like to publish it or link to you, because with all due respect, and I'm a big fan of the Port of London Authority, but I don't think too many Londoners know what the Port of London Authority is, if I can be so bold to say that, and I don't think they'd be there when they're thinking of swimming. It probably wouldn't be their first, pardon the pun, port of call to look up for advice. Absolutely,
and I believe obviously the Thames Tidal Safety Forum also includes the RNLI, and I don't know for sure if they publish on their website those bits of information, as well as a lot of the emergency services. So I will find out whether or not they're also publishing them on their website, which might be a port of call that some might look to first.
Marlena, would you be able to supply some advice to the Mayor on what he should publish in relation to swimming safely in the river?
Well, as a blue tit, we're all accountable for ourselves when we swim. I always say make sure you always have a swim buddy. Even in the Serpentine, there are rules in that, even though it's an enclosed little lake, it's not lifeguarded, and we're only supposed to swim if there's one other person in the lake. You're never supposed to go in just by yourself. I always advocate that people should go in with a buddy or as a group, because you just never know. One person a short while ago was in the water and got his foot entwined with a fishing line, and had it not be for somebody with him to help untangle him, he would have been stuck completely. So there are dangers that you don't think about that are there.
I've got this. I think you've pretty much answered this question, Marlena, but you're welcome to add more. There's clearly a balance, isn't there, between swimming, which we should encourage, and safety. I think you've pretty much touched on that, really.
Yes, you can't be ignorant when you're swimming in a moving, live body of water that other users are using as well. Our main concern when we're swimming is for other rivercraft coming upon us quite suddenly, and this can happen within 2 strokes of an oar, We stick to swimming port side, and rowers generally should be in the middle of the river, but quite often they aren't. So we have those concerns as well. That's why we're always visible. So swimmers in the water with the sun glistening on you are quite often invisible. So you have to be mindful. You have to know what you're doing. It's not the same as jumping in a swimming pool where there's a lifeguard and it's enclosed. This is a proper big body of water, and you can't just do it willy-nilly. You can't just jump in and think you're going to have a good time, because you could end up getting in one place and getting out at another, and you might not know your access points. So you do have to know a little bit. There could be really good signage along the riverbank to put these risks to the public. Do you know the water temperature? Do you know your access points? Make people aware of what they're doing, and then people will get a knowledge and do it safely.
It's a bit like walking at night, isn't it? Be seen, I think, is probably
Yes.
the biggest piece of advice.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Or indeed driving in a snowstorm, as has been, what you take out with you when you drive in the snowstorm is different to what you take with you any other day. You prepare yourself for these trips, and I think that's probably what's been lost over the years is that knowledge around water, which is ridiculous given we're an island nation. I mean, it's farcical, And let's also not forget the other favourite line I have, is that we can go to the beach and we can walk into the sea at any point around our coastline and no one stops us. And people drown at sea as well. It is risky, it is risky getting into water, which is why the education aspect of it, which I think we've all talked about, is so important. And that should start now, really. It needs as part of this policy.
That's a very good point. It's education, and that's why I'm surprised there's nothing on the Mayor's website about that, really. Grace, want to...
Well, I guess just on this point that it's about education, it's about messaging. So obviously education is incredibly important, but generally is only accessed by people who are interested in understanding. So messaging is really, really key, and we'd be very happy to work with the GLA and the Mayor and partners on some of that messaging so that it's really clear where it's safe to swim, how it's safe to swim, because we will still get people who think, well, if it's safe to swim here, it's probably safe to swim there, and that's not necessarily the case. And so we're very much of the view that, we want to ensure that there's as few deaths as possible in the River Thames. And so I think if we can get that messaging right so that people aren't jumping in places they shouldn't be jumping in, I think that's really key.
Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, Assemblymember Tyrrell.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to the panel for their contributions. However, I don't actually have a supplementary question. I wanted to use this opportunity to instead address you, Chair, to formally put on record the Conservative Group's disappointment that Bromley Council was not invited to our second panel this afternoon, and instead Inner London Council was invited to join the panel. As we know, councils are responsible for maintaining rivers in London and outer London due to the more rural nature of our outer London boroughs face some more unique challenges, which is why we felt strongly that the outer London Council should be on the panel. When I challenged you on this over email, I was told that Bromley Council wasn't invited because of the gender of the speaker that they plan to spend, which we think undermines the quality of the evidence we'll be able to receive to not have Bromley Council or Outer London represented because of the fact they didn't send the gender that we wanted them to send. As such, we think that decision was wrong and that we should have had an Outer London Council, and as such, the Conservative Group will not be partaking in the second panel or returning after the interval.
Thank you. Your concern and absence is noted, and we will have Lewisham on the council. Thank you very much. That ends this panel. Thank you very much to my guests for that excellent discussion. Loads of good evidence there, and thank you for all the work that you're doing to make London more accessible and swimmable, and please do keep up the good work. To the rest of the Assembly, we'll be back in 5 minutes with a short adjournment. Thank you. Welcome back to today's Environment Committee meeting. As we continue our investigation into swimmable rivers, we'll now discuss improving London's rivers with our guests. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to our guests participating in the second panel. We're joined by John Bryden, who is Head of Improving Rivers at Thames 21, and Paul Powsland, founder and friends of the River Roading and the River Roading Trust. And joining us remotely is Councillor Louise Krupski, who is Deputy Mayor and Environment of Transport and Climate Action at Lewisham Council. Thank you all very much for joining us. The first question is to all of you, and I'll start with you, John. What do you think a plan for making London's rivers swimmable should look like, and what should it include?
Hi, thank you for the invite, first of all. So I suppose there's multiple things that it needs to look like. There needs to be a robust monitoring approach, which includes citizen scientists, and as well as community organisations and charities like Thames 21 and academics. And that needs to be integrated with regulators in Thames Water, so that data, is used to inform what happens. And also, really, that helps hold both those organisations to account, which I think is really important. And we have got examples of that, which I can mention later, maybe. That monitoring also needs to be undertaken in a way that not only identifies the issue, but identifies the solution. For far too long, I've been working on London's rivers for nearly 20 years, and you see lots of monitoring work done, and you see the reports get written, get read, and then get forgotten. And we actually need to translate that into action, and that's a really important element, and that's where we need to see a change in that approach. It really needs to deliver that action. We need to collect the evidence needed to drive that action. That's regulatory, but that is also about nature-based solutions, actions, and environmental markets. And then we also, linking through to that, we need to develop a blended finance approach, because, it will cost this, to deliver swimmable rivers, and reduce pollution, remove pollution from our rivers. But there is a whole wide range of ways to pay for that. And that is, through corporates. And we have received quite big corporate funding, and we've identified significantly more corporate funding, which can be delivered, which can deliver nature-based solutions. But it can also involve a wide range of statutory and also water company funding as well. Now, what happens a lot of the time at the moment is siloed investment. The Environment Agency might do something, the local authorities another thing, the water company another thing, and the corporates won't be there. If we can integrate all of these things together, that's where we can actually deliver sustainable, healthy, clean rivers which support community life and community health throughout the capital. I'd also say one slight thing is we shouldn't just concentrate on bacteria. Bathing water status has historically concentrated just on bacteria. We also need to look at a whole range of pollutants which are do affect or can affect human health, including wider ranges of sewage pollution, but forever chemicals, for instance, but also road runoff pollution. And there's a huge number of those pollutants in road runoff which can be carcinogenic as well.
Thank you. The road runoff is coming up in every meeting we're having. Paul, can I check with you, what should a plan look like and what should it include?
Overall, the key issue is that the interests of the rivers and the interests of people to swim in them are one and the same. And therefore, I think we need to, if we're going to have swimmable rivers, we need to go right back to the underlying way that we relate to our rivers in this country. And for too long, we have related to them as merely a resource to be used for human ends. And even the agencies and the bodies that are supposed to be looking after rivers approach it from that way. So the EA sees the river as effectively a resource. And unless and until we go right underneath that and say that actually, no, we are intimately connected to our rivers and they are themselves deserving of rights and to have their interests represented in our systems, we are still going to be going down the same road of the current catastrophic failure that we see. And one of the key ways that I've seen to address that change in relationship that we need to our rivers is volunteer river guardians. They're on every river around London, and they are doing that holistic view not just saying, oh, we're in charge of water quality, we deal with planning, we deal with rubbish, we deal with navigation. It's speaking for the river in all the different ways that needs to be. And I've noticed that on the roading. It's what started off as a litter picking campaign, moved to water quality, moved to planning, moved to habitat restoration, all of these things. So we do need to see it holistically. There are also a number of specific things that we need to address, and maybe we can go into more depth on some of these because they may take a bit more time, but just to highlight them. Firstly is the issue of which rivers are in fact suitable for swimming, because I think in London there's a bit of a difficulty. We have very big rivers like the Thames, as we discussed in the last session, where actually currents and navigation and ships make it quite difficult to swim in the centre. But we also have a number of much smaller rivers, some of them completely lost, obviously underground, not suitable for swimming, but even sort of more paddling rivers that aren't suitable for swimming. So there aren't that many that have that Goldilocks, if we can call it, Goldilocks level of river that we need. I'm here to obviously advocate for the Roding, and the Roding is such a river. It's the third biggest river in London, and it doesn't have really any navigation on it particularly, and it doesn't have great currents like the Thames does, and where I am, it's the perfect chest depth for swimming. And indeed, I do already go swimming in the river. Maybe we'll talk about that more later. Another thing is access, so finding places that are easily accessible to large urban population centres. We say the Roding also has that. Then it's looking at things like rubbish. So both floating rubbish, which can actually obviously dramatically ruin the experience of being in a river. You don't particularly want to be swimming in floating plastic and other waste, but also the waste that has built up in London's rivers and waterways on the bottom of the river. We can't have people going in swimming where they're going to cut their feet open on metal or glass, which is a big problem on the Roding due to 50 years of effectively not being looked after by any agency at all in that respect. And then finally, of course, we come to water quality. The key thing about that is that there is much that needs to be done, but it is a solvable problem. It is not beyond the wit of man to solve that problem. We are already, and we'll probably go into this later, with Thames 21 working on a project to actually find out what is going on in terms of water quality, because I think one of the most shocking things you're probably coming across is we don't even know what the water quality in our rivers in London is like, and actually nobody knows where all of the sewage outlets and other polluting outlets in London are. I'll say that again, nobody knows where those outlets are. And I think in a city the size of London, that is a very shocking fact indeed. So something concrete that the GLA and the Mayor can do is to support local community groups to find out where they are, because we can't fix the problem until we know the extent of it.
Yeah, that's vital. Thank you. Louise, coming to you. So what should the Mayor's plan look like, and what would you like to see it include?
Thank you so much for inviting me to speak, and it's really great to hear the last two speakers, particularly John, who I've done quite a lot of work with in terms of getting blue credits recognised for the work we're doing on rivers. I think the crucial fact for me, the crucial point about all of this is proper naturalisation and deculverting of the river system, because you can't, like our Ravensbourne, for instance, where we've got some of the deepest parts of the river, it's underneath a road, it's it's just completely not suitable for swimming, for the pollutant runoffs that you've already obviously talked about. And the key really is the naturalisation and the flood risk management that rivers really need to play a proper part in. Where we've done this, the effects of it are extraordinary. We've done some fantastic work in naturalising rivers in Beckenham Place Park East, which have already, when it went in, we had a massive flood event, and we actually thought there was a problem. We thought that, oh no, this can't be right. The fields around the river can't possibly be flooding. It's too quick. There's no way, this must be a 1 in 100 event kind of thing, but surely it's wrong. They did all the testing and actually proved that it actually was a proper flood event. So as the moment the flood system went in and the river was naturalised, the flooding actually happened. And it's keeping approximately 900 homes from flooding. And also, the naturalisation will allow people to get access to the rivers more. And we have the River Ravensbourne, which is probably the biggest kind of river going through our borough, and there are not many places that you can actually swim, but there are a lot of places where you can access the river and paddle, explore the biodiversity, have school groups doing pond dipping, all of those things which are actually really, really important pieces of the puzzle. But you can't do that unless you have really good shallow access and you have naturalisation, and you have significant areas of it so that you don't get areas overworked, because what you don't want is areas that are beautifully biodiverse and then suddenly kind of corrupted by lots and lots of members of the public actually trampling all over it and causing corrosion. So, those things have to be weighed up. And I really echo the comment of, we have people and rivers have to work together. And we can make that happen. And where we've seen the naturalisation of the rivers and deculverting, it's had a massive effect on our flood prevention and a massive effect on biodiversity increase. So for me, that is what I would want to see more. I want to see, and then the follow through from that is the access from the public and hopefully paddling and swimming in rivers. So that would be my call.
Thank you very much. I'm going to hand over now to Assemblymember Roberts.
Thank you, and good afternoon. Some of this has already been answered by Paul earlier regarding the current challenges, particularly in the roading, regarding the stuff on the riverbed and all of these things. So we know what needs to be done. There needs to be a clean-up, and we know that there needs to be concerted efforts, particularly in terms of rubbish and stuff. This is also a question for John as well, of course. On the river roading itself, what sort of timescale, if there was a concerted effort, what sort of timescale do you think we could see the river roading becoming genuinely swimmable for all in as safe an environment as possible?
Timescale in respect to things like rubbish and physical access, or water quality, which is
water quality is a big thing, and that's but in terms of the
physical access.
Physical. I mean, I know the water quality is physical, but that's going to take longer.
I mean, I think near term. So actually, I live on the river just outside Barking, and for my own purposes, I wanted to swim in the river when the water quality is okay in the summer, when it hasn't rained particularly. And I noticed when I started swimming, I put my foot down, and there was like a lockdown there. I didn't know what it was, so I just used a floating raft by myself while I was swimming to just slowly remove all the obstructions and rubbish at the bottom of the river, and I cleared a 50-metre stretch where I can now safely swim and put my feet down, just myself, over a course of a summer. Every time I go swimming, I pick up a few more stuff, and if I felt anything down there, I'd drag it up while having a swim at the same time. So clearing the whole river would probably take, best part of a decade, but actually in London it'd be a lot of effort. But clearing certain sections where people are going to swim could be done over a number of years. We've already got volunteers doing it, and if the mayor could, or the GLA could support in things like, it would make it much, much quicker if they just supplied us with a big barge to put the rubbish in and took that away, because then we wouldn't have to drag it out the river, take it off via the road, that kind of thing. We could then get volunteers removing all that stuff in, I think, a couple of years to make certain areas clear of underwater obstructions and rubbish. And I think what that would do is really give a signal that this is happening. I think one of the problems with swimmable rivers, it feels like a very distant kind of dream in the future. That would show this is a definite thing that is happening on the ground now to start making this pledge a reality. So it's something that I think can definitely be done. Similarly with floating rubbish, if efforts could be given to help support community volunteers. We already have big cleanups every year on the river roading with dozens of people removing hundreds of bin bags of rubbish from all the reed beds around the river. Efforts to support that would be great, and also putting pressure on people like the Port of London Authority. The River Roading Trust has over a number of years requested them to clean up their reed bed, which they own, and they have flat out refused to do it because they don't think it's their responsibility. So I think pressure could be put on the PLA to actually clean their land of the endemic plastic and litter pollution that is currently polluting the roading. Would be really useful as well.
Okay, thank you. John, you may want to talk in general terms rather than the roading itself, but you can talk about the roading if you want. Liberty Hall here.
More than
London's favourite river.
Yeah, so we've actually been working with Paul, or my team has been working with Paul, and through our Revive Our Rivers programme, which has been looking at water quality and bathing water quality within the roading. And there is one location which is to near bathing water status. It's a very small location, and then it's polluted immediately downstream. We've got a report coming out in the next week or so, which highlights that. We have also, so we do also, we've got bathing water designations in 2 other sites, up in Oxfordshire, in Wallingford, and in Oxford itself at Port Meadows. And comparing some of the results from the roading to some of those sites, they're actually very comparable. Okay. And those are sites where there is some swimming activity at the moment. So we're actually not too far away in some respects. But in actual fact, if you're going to clean up the whole river, that does need a whole concerted effort to improve the water quality. There are loads of different pollution issues and also physical habitat issues, which Paul highlighted there, particularly around litter. But, you know, certainly with concerted effort and integrating the funding sources, as I sort of indicated earlier, I do fully believe that can happen in 10 years or less.
Okay. And we heard from Marlena from Teddington Blue Tits earlier about the fact that they've got this facility, the Hawker Centre in Kingston, that they're able to use, and that provides, you know, toilets, parking, changing facilities, and all of that. Is there anything of a similar nature along the road? I'm not familiar with the roading at all, I'm afraid. Is there anything of a similar nature which could be pressed into service in order, because that apparently does encourage, they've got 1,800 members by all accounts. Is there anything of that sort of nature which could be used, or is it purely wild and free and lovely?
There's a variety of different locations. I'm going to be putting in the report to the evidence call to the for Swimble Rivers, the different locations. And that's actually what's quite nice about the roading. There are very different ones. Mm-hmm. So there's one at Town Quay in Barking, which is effectively an old quay area, completely right in the centre of town, would be ideal for swimming, except it's owned by the Port of London Authority, who have blocked all attempts at any community projects there thus far. And again, pressure could be put on them to actually engage with the community, to allow local people to use the river that they own. And also problems with siltation, which could be solved by opening the Barking Barrage. Further up, there are more kind of more rural locations, so on the edge of Barking, where it's kind of more naturalised around the edges. And further up, there is around Ilford Golf Course, which is owned by the London Borough of Redbridge. There are some very green spots, actually, but only a few hundred metres from the centre of Ilford. Any one of those could be a location for changing. Probably the best one would be around Town Quay, where there's already a community, there's a big redevelopment project there. But yeah, I think the roading offers, if the access and landowning situations could be dealt with, offer some of the best opportunities for swimming in London, with access being a little bit of a problem because we are tidal there, so we have a 2-metre tidal range, so some kind of access pontoons or something would be necessary. But otherwise, the river is, once water quality and rubbish is dealt with, kind of good to go. Just to check as well, will I get a chance to talk about water quality at some point later on? Is that coming up? Yeah, great.
There you are. And John, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, so I suppose in addition to what Paul says, you know, usually the current bathing water status, you have to have access to toilets and changing facilities. There's potential in Wanstead Park where there's some existing toilets. It's a little bit far from the river. And there's a couple of other locations where potential integration with cricket or football clubs may provide those sort of facilities if we can arrange them to be opened up, so that the barriers are not infeasible. And that's, you know, we're talking a lot about the roading, and that's great. And there's certainly opportunities there to do that. And there's similar opportunities on many other rivers in London as well.
So I think that would be the easy part in many ways. For instance, there's a development just near Central Barking where they're going to put a community river centre there. So if the rubbish and the water quality and the access were dealt with, I think finding somewhere to host changing facilities is probably going to be the easier part of it.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you, Jack.
Thanks. John, I'm going to declare a self-interest or conflict of interest that I live on the River Lee, but are there any possibilities for the River Lee?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a river I've worked closely on for nearly 20 years now. There is, of course, Hackney Marshes, where Hackney Beach is, and there's certainly some issues around there, but there's some good locations there. And then all through the navigation, that could potentially be a great opportunity as well. You know, it's got some issues with access navigation, but it's not infeasible to do anything like that. And further up in the tributaries, there's also been moves afoot. So, for instance, in Broomfield Park, there's a number of lakes which sort of are online lakes leading from, surface water system, and same in Grovelands Park in Enfield as well. So, there are lots of locations where this is possible, and if you extend the criteria from swimming to, access and paddling, there's loads of locations where, you've got nice gravel riffles, nice habitats, good potential for access into the river for communities. And really what we're not just doing there is we're creating a love for the river from communities and ability for them to sort of understand the value it provides to them, and that can really improve social cohesion and also community health. And I think those are really important framing for sort of some of this. That, my passion is obviously biodiversity and, the health of rivers, but what that can provide back to us, in society, I think is really essential. And I think Paul probably highlights that more than most. And, but if we can extend that to all of society, I think that is where we are really delivering benefits.
Absolutely. Assembly Member McCartney, someone who knows a little bit about River Lee and Enfield.
Yes, and the Broomfield Park is my local park. So, and of course, it did used to be an Edwardian bathing pool, one of those ponds as well. So, hopefully we can get something sorted there. But I wanted to ask, just start with Paul, if I can. And you said you wanted to swim. Is there anyone swimming with you, or are you still doing it as a solitary exercise?
For the moment, it's solitary because the access is via my mooring, although other people are welcome to use it if they'd like to. I think I'm doing it partially because I really love swimming, and actually I feel like it would be a deep tragedy to allow my birthright to swim in the river that I live on, effectively, to be taken away by companies that want to destroy it for profit. But I think it's important to dispel this notion that our rivers are intrinsically destroyed, unrecoverable, dangerous places to be. And actually by swimming there, I think it demonstrates that actually this is possible. It's already a reality. We just need to work to make it better and more accessible to everyone. In terms of the roading, lots of people do use what's called the Wanstead Beach, which is up by Wanstead Park. If you go there on a sunny day, you'll, over the course of the day, probably see hundreds of families using that, I imagine. It's perfect for it. It's got a nice little gravel slope, about yay deep at the deep part. So yeah, that's already very much utilised. And I think the key thing is to make sure that those who are utilising it, it's safe for those people, and to extend the times where it can be used, because obviously after heavy rain and things like that, you can't use it safely for at least a week or so afterwards.
Okay, thank you. And then John, are you working with the Mayor's office at the moment on his Swimmable Rivers project?
So we work regularly with a number of officers on a whole wide range of things. We're not formally doing it at the moment, and it would be good to do that, I suppose, but I think both they and also we need that time to be able to do it. We are working on many things which relate to this, because Swimmable Rivers is, I suppose, the outcome. There are so many different outputs all along the way which are slowly or fastly moving forward. What we need to do is bring that all together.
But I think what would be helpful for the committee is if you have a list of areas where you think that we could actually get some quick wins relatively easily, and I say easily in a relative way, of course, because I do notice that on the Mayor's Guide to Open Swimming Locations, he has the Road Inn, for example, down as a possible future project.
Yeah. So Paul and I are, just yesterday we met, we partly because of Thames Water's pollution, they're going to be providing us, and because of Paul's identification of that pollution and also campaigning around that, they're going to be providing us some money to investigate water quality within the Roding. That's very much a start, and as part of that, we're going to be looking at solutions as well, really driving that action. More funding needs to be put into that to really deliver the biggest results. So I'll say building on those sort of case studies and supporting those case studies is really great. There are a number of other areas that we're already working on. So, for instance, on outfalls, we are working with Thames Water to get them to provide all of their layers of outfalls throughout the whole of the Thames Basin, to put that on a map which then citizen scientists can, use to actually see where their outfalls are and then report the pollution coming out of them, and then hopefully Thames Water will act on that pollution. They're involved in the project, so, fingers crossed, but there's not necessarily a commitment to do that. I think, there's projects like the Dig Once, the Streetworks SUDS programme, which is an Ofwat Innovation funded project. We need to really see, it's going at the moment. It's got about another year left, I think just over a year. We need to see that implemented really well. We need to be looking at the nature finance side of things and sort of, I've had to turn down funding from corporates recently because I've not had the projects. We need to invest in the development of the pipeline of projects so that they can be implemented when the funding comes available, and really get to the point where we're not actually just being reactive to funding, but where we're actually putting business cases together for multiple millions of pounds to go and pump prime the restoration of rivers like the Roding with 10, 15, 20 million pounds from a whole variety of sources, because that's what we need.
Thank you. I think we're coming on to the water quality a little later. But can I ask Councillor Krupski, if I can, about Beckenham Place Swimming Lake? And just having a look on the website, it does look a very exciting project. But so can I ask you, what has been Lewisham's experience in overseeing it, and how difficult was it to get it started and to completion?
Okay. So it's been a kind of long journey, and I think we've kind of got it right now. So when it first, we got lottery heritage funding and money from the GLA to completely re-dig basically an old lake in Beckenham Place Park. It was a lake that was in existence before World War II, but it was infilled with all sorts of really, really nasty stuff, which we had to get rid of. And we opened it, and basically it's got a shallow beach section, and then it's got quite a deep section, and it's completely naturalised. The water comes from a borehole and also from flood collection water, and it has various filtration systems in it, as well as natural filtration from reed beds. It's incredibly successful as a clean piece of water for people to swim in, and we're very, very proud of what we've managed to achieve. But it was a little bit of a victim of its own success at the beginning, is what we'd say. There was a kind of confluence of all sorts of things all at once, which meant that the interest in public swimming in Beckenham Place Park just exploded. So we had the Mayor, Sadiq Khan, coming down on one of the hottest days in recorded history to Beckenham Place Park, and there was huge amounts of publicity about this new swimming area that was going to be created, etc., and we just ended up having literally hundreds to thousands of people wanting to use the lake all at once, and it caused us a lot of issues in terms of safety, and we had to very quickly, unfortunately, close the facility to work out and then take a view on how we were actually going to manage it properly. And I think if we had our time again, we would have done the opening very, very differently. We would have done a soft test in a quieter period of the year, opened it up gradually before doing a big public launch. And it was just, we just didn't quite get it right in terms of the opening. So what we have now is we have a very regulated, carefully monitored swimming facility where people use flotation devices, and children have a test before they have to be a certain level of swimming before they can use the lake, because it does drop off and get quite deep. And that was the problem, is that unfortunately but what we would, having talked to officers about this week, they were really keen to stress that that there isn't really any fixed guidance around what you need to put into these wild swimming places in terms of lifeguards, in terms of do you need flotation devices, what sort of signage you need to have, what sort of rescue equipment you need to have. There's not enough guidance around this stuff to make councils feel confident that they can go ahead and do these projects. And actually, there's a real desire. Beckenham Place Park absolutely proved the desire of residents to want to do wild swimming. It's been an incredible success. And even with all the restrictions that we've had to put in, it is very, very, very popular. We're literally getting thousands of people a year swimming. And we also have other water sports as well. They're canoeing, sorry, I can't remember what it's called now. When you're on one of those flats ones.
Stand up paddleboard.
Paddleboard, yes.
Yeah, paddleboarding. That's what I'm trying to say. All sorts of stuff going down there, and also educational visits with children, etc., etc. So it's being used all year round. Really, really successful project, but it kind of took us a while to kind of get it right. And I think that there is guidance needed on this stuff. I don't think you can just assume that if you open up a really nice bit of water, you just don't know what you're going to get. You don't know how many people you're going to get. You don't know how safe it is. What are you going to do about children? What are you going to, there's all sorts of questions, and that needs real careful guidance so that councils are not going to end up being liable. Because the problem is if you're encouraging people to go and swim, then does that make you liable? Because you are, as a council, saying, we're encouraging you to do this because it's really good for your health and well-being. Are you then liable if someone really has a nasty, serious accident? Now, no one seems to suggest that if you go and swim in the sea, as wild swimming, that the council who borders that particular piece of seascape is liable. However, that becomes a bit more vague when you have got a lake or you have a specific piece of river. So I think I would urge the committee to really think about where is the guidance? What do councils need to put in place to make sure that they will not be liable, or that they feel confident that they can go ahead under that guidance to do this kind of work? Because I think it's really, really important to get it right.
Thank you. I think that's a really important point. And just looking at the website for the lake, it looks like you've got a great deal of activity going on, including a bring your own boat session if you wanted to as well. But I do notice that on the safety, for example, for cold water swimming, people have got to do an induction course, I presume because of the dangers. How did you get over the concerns about risk and liability?
Well, we basically just changed the whole structure of it. So when we first put it in, it was completely open. So it was just like, right, just come down, swim off the beach, off you go. And what we put initially, the first thing we did when we had quite a serious situation is that we put a big fence up around it and said, no one's going in there until we've worked this out. Yeah. And then over time, we've grown, we've got hedgerows around it now. We have CCTV cameras because there are still issues with ASB, with children, particularly in the hot months, kind of getting over wherever they can and getting in the water. We have lifeguards. We just changed the whole nature of it. We just took a view that we need to get this really, really well pinned down and become and we have a contractor who runs the sessions. They're bookable. It's it's a proper swimming facility almost, rather than like a free for all, which is what it was initially. So it's completely changed.
Thank you. And I don't know whether yourself or John has an idea as to who should be producing that guidance. Is it like to be the mayor, or some? Is there a national organisation that has experience in this?
I don't know the answer to that. Maybe John can answer that, but I definitely feel that needs to be in place if you're going to do this kind of swimmable rivers project. We need something from somewhere.
So yeah, I suppose I'd firstly like just to compliment Lewisham Council for the excellent work they've done at that and the extreme responsibility they've taken around swimming there, which I think is fantastic. The Outdoor Swimming Society do produce a guide to setting up inland bathing areas in the UK, which is well worth a look. I don't know it in particular detail, but that is a really excellent starting point, and I'm sure they would be able to provide additional support, and we'll submit that as part of the evidence call.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Just before we move on, would it be possible to address the point about what the Mayor could do? Because I think that's actually a really important point. Because I think there is so much that both the Mayor and the GLA could do if they think imaginatively and out of the box a little bit. And first of all is in regard to access. We have a specific example from the Roding where we've been trying for 5 years now to open up a path alongside the river from Barking to Ilford. It would be the largest riverside path opened up in London for decades and would link up the existing riverside path. The land was owned by TfL and they were basically blocking it for many years. And actually, after being invited to the Swimble Rivers thing, they've got a contact into the GLA and the Mayor's office, and actually, thank you to them, they helped unlock it, and now negotiations are proceeding to actually open that land. But it took a little nudge from the GLA and the Mayor's office to say, well, you're a public body, why are you not opening this out? And there are, I imagine, going to be many, many more examples around London of publicly owned estates alongside rivers that could be used for this project to open it out. I think of another one right by the Roding, a huge tract to the river side is owned by MOPAC, Mayor's Office of Policing and Crime. I look after their land for them for free because they don't do anything, and all they do is occasionally come and destroy our trees and then won't communicate with us. So again, there's an example there of how could MOPAC best use its estates to allow access to the Roding along those stretches, for instance. And I imagine that's going to be repeated throughout London of not just land owned by the Mayor or the GLA, but bodies that they have some control over. Another thing is in relation to water quality, which I'll go in more detail in a second, but I think the Mayor's role there is more crucial than it might look. Obviously, I think demanding that TfL set up a department and a programme for investigating and remediating every single road runoff outlet in London is crucial. At the moment, obviously, it's easy to bash the water companies, and no doubt we'll go on to that in a minute, but also road runoff is potentially as important, and the Mayor there has direct control because he can demand that TfL actually sort it out and put the funding necessary to make sure that every single outfall is remediated. And I'm not sure that swimming on the Roding will be safe until that's fully done. Even in regards to sewage, there is a lot that both the Mayor and the GLA can do. Put it this way, if I, as a complete unpaid volunteer randomer with no powers whatsoever, can have a significant impact on the conversation about sewage on the Roding through my campaigning, then the Mayor and the GLA can have an even bigger impact, surely. For instance, although they don't have any regulatory powers, it's open to any private body to bring a private prosecution. So any public body to bring a private prosecution. So the Mayor could set up a department and promise to prosecute every single illegal sewage spill happening in London. And of course that would take an initial amount of funding, but costs can be recovered even in criminal proceedings, so it would become self-funding. And I think even the threat of doing that could be a major stick towards the water companies. So we no longer have to ask them nicely to sort it out. It's like, sort this out or we will prosecute you over and over and over again, and we will guarantee you we will prosecute every illegal sewage spill in London. That could have a huge impact. And then finally, supporting efforts by local community groups to find out the extent of the problem. So we have this joint project with Thames 21, the River Roding Trust, unique in London, we think, to actually find out where are all the polluting sewage outfalls on the Roding and what would it take to fix them. If the Mayor or the GLA could give a small amount of additional funding, that could then be extended, for instance, to road runoff, which is technically kind of the Mayor's responsibility because much of it from TfL, and we could have a report by the end of this year that says, for the Roding, this is what it would take to actually fix the problem and make it swimmable. And that could then be replicated for other rivers. Oh, one final thing as well, support in relation to rubbish, support the existence of local community groups and what they're doing. I think it is the best return on investment possible. Small grants to existing local guardian groups who are already doing litter picking to turbocharge that and really increase the amount of litter picking and rubbish removal that's already going on. I mentioned before, if we had a bit of extra money, we could hire barges, massively increase the efficiency of the litter picking we're doing. Thank you.
Thank you. That's all incredibly helpful. We're about to go on to biodiversity and wildlife, but it feels like a good moment to talk about water quality. So what is for water quality of London's rivers and how can it be improved? This is your moment to bash for water companies, I believe, and other options.
That's a big question. And we just, as John said, in the next week, we're about to publish a report, which is done by Thames 21 and River Road and Trust with local volunteers to...
Sorry. Carry on, Paul.
To actually study for the first time water quality on the Roding. I think that's even worth thinking about in of itself, that never before has an organisation like the Environment Agency actually tested and studied the water quality on the Roding. And, you know, for London's third biggest river running through major population centres in Barking and Ilford, I think that's a shocking fact by itself. But what that report shows is that although there is a severe problem with sewage pollution on the Roding, it is not an unsolvable problem, because actually the water coming into London on the Roding is okay. There is further upstream a lot of agricultural issues, but they're obviously mostly during the winter, so it's less problematic in the summer. And what we see is that effectively the water comes into London at Loughton and on the Roding, and then you see ever more combined sewer overflows putting sewage into the river. Which means that if we can solve probably the worst 20 to 30 of those outfalls in London, we can probably make the river swimmable to a certain extent, at least in the right conditions. It is a big job, but it's not an impossible job. And what we need is, firstly, the information about where these outfalls are and what they're doing, which comes into the report with Thames 21 that we're planning to do this year. And then also a commitment from the water company, Thames Water, to actually fix those. And then a clear commitment from every authority that has the power in relation to this to demand that if they refuse to do it. For the EA to say, we will prosecute every illegal spill. For the Mayor to say, if the EA doesn't do it, we're going to step in and do that through private prosecutions. For the public estate where you own land along rivers to bring private actions against the water companies. It's possible now from this year with the Manchester Ship Canal case, private landowners can bring civil cases against water companies for illegal sewage spills. And again, I imagine the Mayor or the GLA or subsidiary bodies probably own land on every river in London, so they could bring such actions. As an example of maybe where things have gone wrong in the past, I just want to raise something from the Roding, where there was an illegal outfall on a place called the Aldersbrook, which I discovered just by walking along the river, pouring raw sewage into the Roding right in the centre of Ilford. Now, what is shocking about that is that it had probably been going on for decades, and yet nobody noticed. The EA and no other regulatory body actually walks along the rivers of London to see what is going on. So we have these event duration monitors, but that's only for the outfalls that we know of, that Thames Water officially accept. There are likely dozens of others on the Roding alone, which are just nobody even knows about, unknown unknowns. And the only way to find out about them is to walk along the river. And it still shocks me that it took a volunteer in my spare time to actually find a serious criminal offence happening in the centre of Ilford, and that the regulatory authorities didn't know about that. Since that was 3.5 years ago, it's still been pouring in sewage since. Thames Water have said they will fix it, and we keep getting pushed back. It's hopefully going to happen this year, but I believe that it would have happened a lot more quickly if the EA had actually prosecuted it or threatened to prosecute it, and they haven't done so. So there are many of those kinds of outfalls which will take a kind of very pointed, on-the-ground focus to actually find where they're going wrong, and we need the official body to support local guardians and say, if local guardians find these sewage spills, we will make sure they're dealt with and not just left. There's a final reason why they shouldn't be left. The report that's coming out next week about sewage monitoring, water quality on the Roding monitoring, the highest reading we found was 19 times the official limit right downstream of that outfall in the centre of Ilford, a place with hundreds of thousands of people. So to me, it's a real... There has been a shocking regulatory failure in relation to sewage, but that is not an unsolvable problem. and we know all the things we need to do to solve it in relation to sewage. Do you want me to talk about road runoff now or later? What's the best way?
Road runoff would also be great if you're...
Yeah, just very briefly, I mean, this is even more of an unknown. At least we know for the sewage roughly where most of the CSOs are. We have almost no idea on the roading. And it's an interesting problem because it's completely unmonitored. There's no legal requirement to put monitoring equipment on road runoff. And yet, in the long term, it could be a far more serious problem because at least when we stop the sewage coming in, the river will, over the course of no more than a year, probably heal most of that. But actually, with the cocktail of chemicals going into the silt of the river, it's not going to self-heal, and we don't actually know the kind of remediation that might be necessary to deal with all of the chemicals that are currently held in the silt of the roading. So we do need to stop those outfalls. I discovered some of the problem on the roading when I was doing a litter clear up in the channel, and it rained whilst we were in the river, and suddenly a cocktail of black gunk just started spewing out of the side of the river like smelling of oil. But no one would see that. Why would anyone be stood in the river under a bridge in Ilford normally? You don't do that kind of behaviour unless you're looking after the river. So this goes completely unknown, unnoticed, unmonitored. So we need, as a very minimum, TfL and ideally national highways, if we can put the pressure on them, to actually survey and come clean with every single outfall they have and start monitoring what is coming out of those, because we can't fix that problem until we know what it is. And on the roading, it's likely to be a massive issue. As the river enters London, it goes under the M11, and from then on, it's no more than a few hundred metres from a motorway, M11, North Circular, all the way down to the Thames. So it is it is the case that huge numbers of completely unmonitored outfalls are pouring in unknown quantities of dangerous chemicals into the river, and we have no idea what they are.
That's really powerful, thank you. And to anyone watching this, I know on your social media you regularly document sewage outflows and all sorts of pollution. I think that's worth people seeing because it's really grim.
go to my Twitter feed, you want to see lots of photos of illegal sewage outflows.
Gripping content, but no, it is important. John, I can't make this commitment because we're a cross-party group, but I imagine that we'd be able to write to Thames Water once you've written that report to ask for them to commit to clearing up these pollution outflows once you know where they are. But please do keep in contact with us, and we'll try and get cross-party agreement on that. But I imagine it's something the committee might be able to do to support. Assemblyman Mahfouz, thank you for your patience.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for the contribution so far. Really powerful. John, I'm going to start with yourself. Now, in September last year, the Mayor announced in terms of a plan to boost wildlife in London, in the rivers, prioritising nature-based solutions. What role do you feel that the improvements to wildlife and biodiversity can play in terms of cleaning up London's rivers?
So, in terms of biodiversity in London's rivers, rivers in general, there's three things which affect biodiversity: the amount of water, i.e. the right amount of water, not too much, not too little, the habitat within the river, and most critically for London, water quality and, pollution. So, in actual fact, delivering swimmable rivers at a macro scale will deliver a significant improvement in biodiversity of London's rivers. So I think that's the big message. There might be, the example around Hackney Marshes and the kingfishers. There could be some, local impacts around, habitats, etc., and disturbance. But ultimately, at a macro scale, it will deliver massive improvements to biodiversity by cleaning up London's rivers.
Have you got some data that you could share with us in terms of how that's worked, or?
Well, it hasn't been done yet, but we've got lots of data on nature-based solutions that we've delivered. We've delivered over 11 nature-based solutions, 11 constructed wetlands in a whole variety of areas, particularly in London, including Broomfield Park, as well as with Lewisham and Councillor Cripsky. In a number of other parks, and so we've got really good data where we can monitor the inflows of the wetlands, see how high that pollution is, and monitor the outflows of those wetlands, and really that cleans it up towards good status often, and actually we've even monitored from a bathing water perspective, and it can deliver good bathing water as well.
So there's no juxtaposition between achieving greater biodiversity and improved swimmable rivers for humans to... get into?
There, in terms of biodiversity, it is always, there's lots of niche things. So there is a good example around Hackney Marshes where the swimming there has resulted in disturbance, which has resulted in kingfishers not nesting there. So there is some biodiversity impact, but if you look at it at that macro scale, ultimate improvements in the rivers will significantly restore wildlife and biodiversity within London's rivers.
Are there any lessons that we could pick up to ensure that we're trying to benefit both sides?
I suppose the lessons are detail, and sort of some of the things that Paul was sort of saying in terms of pollution. In terms of road runoff, we've already produced a model which looks at the strategic road network and identifies the amount of pollution, its risks to damaging river health, and also the nature-based solutions that could be delivered. We need to extend that model and significantly improve it. That model is based on some analysis of Thames Water's surface water network. Thames Water's surface water network is incredibly poor data. GLA has done some work recently to enhance that data. We need to integrate that starting on the roading and then sort of apply that to the rest of London. That will identify the nature-based solutions, the constructed wetlands in public parks that can be delivered, and then we need to be able to investigate and go and deliver them. There is also pollution from misconnected households and also pollution from what I call cross connections, which is where Thames Water's assets are failing and the foul sewer is crossing over into the surface water sewer, and that's running into our rivers and causing quite a lot of damage. That we have been looking at that sort of process. Thames Water, until recently, have never recorded their asset failures, i.e. their cross connections. They are starting to do that because we've challenged them. We've also found out through that process that the surface water outfalls, which aren't owned by Thames Water, are the responsibility of the Environment Agency to do enforcement action or to investigate and do enforcement action on. We found out that they haven't been doing that. In terms of the CSOs, Thames Water have got a programme, apparently. We need to see what that is. We need to be able to feed in local data, which is collected, and information and knowledge from local communities to be able to, ensure that the priority outfalls and the priority CSOs are fixed first. We need to integrate the monitoring which Thames Water are going to be doing and the monitoring the Environment Agency are going to be doing with our citizen scientists. And we need to be taking all of that data and integrating it into, that blended finance approach so we stop getting this siloed investment. So those are the big lessons. The other lessons I would say is also we need to, and Councillor Skripsky highlighted this earlier about restoring, rivers and how that's had a massive improvement in Lewisham. That also, in restoring the rivers, really enables the rivers to process pollution more and become much more resilient. Paul also mentioned road runoff, and in comparison to sort of sewage pollution, I would actually say that road runoff is probably the biggest pollution issue affecting rivers in London. The Pimsbrook, which is in Enfield, there are areas of that which has had such bad road runoff pollution and bioaccumulation of metals that only leeches can now live in that river. And that's sort of some of that issues that Paul was highlighting earlier. That's where we really need to be getting into the detail, putting the solutions upstream of the river so that pollution is held and is treated in those wetlands, and then we can go and restore the river habitat and remove that contamination within the river.
That's really powerful, John. So going to Councillor Krupski, how can we maintain biodiversity whilst encouraging access to the river and waterways?
How do you remove it then?
You're on mute, Councillor.
Sorry about that. So can I just, before I answer that question, can I just reiterate what the other guys have been saying? I just think they're absolutely bang on this. But also, I just really want to just mention about flash flooding, because flash flooding is happening at an increasing rate and it causes absolute mayhem within the system, which actually really cannot cope at all. You know, even with Tide Mill and the enormous sewer structures we have, it doesn't. It still can't cope, and you know, we are still going to see sewage outflows into the Thames, other rivers, because we just can't cope with the sheer weight of water with the climate crisis, and that really needs to be recognised in this equation, because if we don't get really good automatically been putting SUDS schemes into our road infrastructure projects, which is what we're trying to do in Lewisham. I'm trying to push that every time we do a junction, every time we do, you know, a crossing, we think about putting some SUDS in to get some of this rainwater into the groundwater system and not immediately going into runoff. And I think that, you know, if there is a call really within to the GLA to kind of, when you're looking at the LIP funding structure for highways developments, that actually you think about adding in some money that is recognisably there to put in SUDS within every single highways intervention. You know, there's some really fantastic work being done at the moment about looking at all the different flood risk areas and combining them to have a strategic view on how to handle this flood risk. But so much can be done on a small scale, bit by bit, if that extra top-up funding was there to be able to facilitate that. And we're trying to do as much of that as possible in Lewisham, and it really is having an effect. And that's only going to get worse. You know, these massive downpours are only going to get worse, and that water is going to end up in our rivers, is going to be taking all those horrible, you know, all the stuff that we've been talking about into our rivers. So we need to look at that as part of the solution. In terms of the biodiversity question, I absolutely agree with the other guys. Any attempt that you're doing to clean up rivers, whether they're for people, whether they're for whatever reason, that is going to have a massive effect on biodiversity. But I really would also urge that if you're going to put swimmable areas into patches of the river, you really need to make sure that the access points to the river are very clear, they're protected, they're well maintained, that they are, you know, that they are done in a way that actually doesn't encourage corrosion. If it just becomes a kind of open for all, and you know, there's multiple points that people can come down to the river edge, you are going to get corrosion of rivers. I mean, one of the biggest problems in agricultural areas with rivers is animal corrosion, where you have lots of cattle going down to the river and drinking from the river. And that corrosion really, really halts biodiversity. It really stops biodiversity being able to get a stronghold and maintain and then do all the work that it should be doing. So I would really urge that you look at making sure that those access points are really clear, they're well constructed, they're well thought through, and the other parts of the river that are around it are made inaccessible so that people cannot corrode the parts of the river that you don't want to be seen. So what we have in Beckenham Place Park, we have very, very, very specific area only where people can come in and out, and all the rest of the area is completely protected for biodiversity.
Thank you for that, Louise. Just on, before I come back to Paul, Paul made a point earlier, well, you've all made a point about road runoff, but actually Paul's point earlier about TfL could just investigate every single road runoff across London, but of course 95% of roads, as Councillor Krupski will know, are under the control of London Council. So you've put forward a really interesting proposal there about all of the LIP funding that you receive, the local implementation plan, transport projects, integrating into each one of those projects an opportunity to develop sustainable urban drainage. How long have you been doing that for? What sort of impact have you seen, and how much has that added in terms of cost?
Well, it's obviously significant addition in cost, and that's the issue with it. So, you know, and obviously there are some places where you just don't have the space, you know, that it's not always possible, but where we are where we can, we are doing it, and it is having a really significant impact. And also the residents love it. They absolutely love it. They get it. They understand it, and it also teaches it's. Those kind of visible things that you're seeing on a daily basis, people actually start to understand about where the water's going. They're not just going, oh, yeah, it's just, you can just put another gully in. We've had a conversation. There's a road called Malpass Road in Lewisham, which is it's a road that kind of dips right down in the middle. And there's also a very, very dangerous junction. So we're doing flood alleviation works. So we've got a little bit of money from the EA, we've got a little bit of money from our LIP funding. We've put in our own investment in to kind of redesign the whole junction with four-way SUD scheme going in there. And we really think that that's going to have a massive effect, because there are some very badly designed basements which literally get flooded on a regular basis now because with flash flooding. So, all of these things can work together. But I think there needs to be a kind of integrated kind of look at this in terms of the funding packages.
Thank you for that. Paul?
Yeah, I support what John said about the fact that the interests of nature and biodiversity are largely aligned with the interests of making rivers swimmable. Whilst there is a place for conservation of nature that effectively excludes humans and lets nature just do its own thing, the reality is that is not possible in London. And what I've noticed on the roading is actually the places that exclude humans are actually the worst, or exclude the majority of humans, because the bad people still get in, the fly tippers still get in, the people lighting fires or throwing in rubbish, so the sewer outlets that nobody can see because they're hidden away on private land, nobody even knows about. I had to trespass to find the sewage outlet that I told you about earlier and that no one has discovered on private land. So the fact is that rivers in London are being impinged upon by humans, and we need as far as possible to make sure they're the good type, doing it for nature rather than damaging it. So I think bringing access is a good thing. Obviously, all the issues around removing rubbish, improving water quality, improving channel health, all those kinds of things we need for swimmable rivers are also going to be great for wildlife. And I think where there are potential difficulties in individual locations, those can be dealt with by moving people to other locations. And as well, if we can make more rivers in London swimmable, we won't get the honeypotting that at the moment causes some of the difficulties, everyone swamping to one beach in Hackney Marshes, because there are like dozens of places you can go to swim on rivers in London. And on the roading, there might be a couple of locations. For instance, we just heard there might be otters living on the roading just near Ilford, so an area that excludes their halt and an immediate area around it might be good, but we can make sure that any place on the river for swimming is away from that area. And just as a personal anecdote, when I've been swimming in the river, I go into the river with the sound of the Chettis warbler only 20 feet away from me. I don't think that Chettis warbler is bothered by my presence, and while I'm swimming away, I sometimes see the kingfisher like a sort of flying right above me and giving a little. I don't know if the little peep peep sound is a hello, but I like to imagine it's a hello to me whilst I'm swimming. So that kingfisher doesn't seem bothered by my presence.
Lovely to hear that, John.
It's hard to follow that, isn't it? I think the important thing is managing access, and that's where at Hackney Marshes it hasn't been managed, and what Paul and Councillor Cripsey says, right? I did just want to touch upon the flooding side of things, and this is a huge potential for, flooding is going to be a massive issue, and it's not long, I suspect, until people start to die from flood risk. And those basement properties, when they're flooding, they get to ceiling level, that's when people start to die. We saw 200 plus die in Valencia, and we've seen other events in New York, and that will happen in London at some point soon. So we really have to address this, but that's also a huge opportunity for swimmable rivers. There's some great programs going on, and I'd really encourage, and we'll submit some of the details on this, but the developing a market-based approach to delivering SUDs through street works, is a really good project. I mentioned it earlier. That is something we have to see mainstreamed. I've also worked on flood risk projects when I was at the EA, and also, since I've sort of seen multiple times the standard investigations going on, i.e. building concrete walls, building flood basins on the same river, spending hundreds of thousands of pounds on those investigations, which not doing too many dissimilar things. And those investigations work, those solutions have been built. We need to, in London, adapt how we are delivering flood risk reduction to a nature-based solution and integrate water quality and biodiversity improvements to that. And we need to take, an environmental market approach to that, because we can align flood risk funding with corporate funding and Thames Water funding, so we can deliver healthy, clean, sustainable rivers which are climate-proof. We've got cases which we're building, some of them with Enfield Council and our landscape recovery project, where we can see, massive water quality improvements and significant flood risk reduction to hundreds of properties. We need to deliver them, and we need support in delivering them. The biggest issue with this is not the capital funding. The capital funding can generally be found through the statutory sources integrated with blended finance sources. The issue is development funding. You really need that development funding to get down into the detail, to be able to, provide the evidence which is needed for these various markets. So that's where I would suggest, and it's not going to work on every river, but it will work on a lot of them. And that's where I'd really encourage, if investment's going to be made, slightly getting away from the public appeal of building nice things and start getting into that development funding. I mean, the capital funding, through LIP and or, SIL frameworks and other funding like that is needed, but much more development funding is needed to drive these impacts.
Thank you. And on that note, I'll hand back to the Chair.
Thank you. And just to echo your comments about being climate-proof, we look at storm patterns that, caused Valencia or a part of Valencia, and we kind of narrowly missed meeting London. And we have to make sure we're protected and preventive for the future, and also really have to look at LA to see that the danger is already here. And Paul, just very briefly, something Marlena said in the first panel that struck me when she said that, we drive and we park and then we go swimming. That feels like if we do have this honeypot approach and more people drive and drive and drive, then that creates more runoff. You talked about the path that's being opened up by roading. Presumably cyclists can go on there too. Is it about building more cycle stands, or is there more things that can happen to encourage people less to drive to these spots?
I think that's where access goes hand in hand with swimmable rivers. Obviously, bike parking is good, but just the path itself would be great. Quite a lot of the roading the area we're in is not accessible. And there's things that the Mayor and the GLA can do to support that granting of access. To say on this bit where we are, the support has been really useful in getting TfL to open up the path. Of course, it's quite odd because TfL is supposed to be there for transport, but there we're prioritising the North Circular, i.e. cars, and owned a perfect route between two towns for cyclists and pedestrians, but we were literally offering them for free to open it up with funding we got from the Mayor, and they would just block. Seems to be some sort of institutional block there, which hopefully is being overcome. Further up the river, the Ilford Golf Course is still closed, and it's owned by London Borough of Redbridge. They are starting to open up, but more can be done. And the Mayor has actually been very supportive with a scheme there to put a bridge across the river so more people can access. But actually, in many ways, like the roading, and I'm sure many other rivers too, is actually a very useful, sustainable transport route. As we know, one of the problems in London transport, all the public transport goes inwards, the roading, like many rivers, cuts downwards. So actually, I genuinely find when I'm trying to get somewhere elsewhere on the Roding Valley, by far the quickest way is cycling straight up the river. So help to improve those paths will not only make rivers more accessible for swimming, but also be good for transport in London more generally.
Thank you very much. Councillor Krupski, if I can come to you briefly about the Ravensbourne River. I don't know if there's anything that's not been said already, but what's been your experience of improving that? And are there any lessons to be learned from how the public have been involved?
I mean, Thames 21 have been extraordinary in helping this. And we're doing sort of several different small projects to kind of deculvert bits of the river by just, shoehorning in as many different kind of grants, support from the EA, support from the GLA, even some money from our Levelling Up Fund for Lewisham Town Centre, because we've got a sculpture park which we're deculverting a section of the river there, and that's been really good. But it's very, very piecemeal, and I think I really do feel that there is definitely following John's work on this, work to be done in terms of really exploiting the kind of blue credit piece in terms of being able to get a project off the ground that is well supported by public funding, which then kickstarts your kind of blue credit journey in order to then to be able to reinvest those blue credits that developers need where they're doing riverside developments where they cannot increase their biodiversity and they need to buy blue credits. Sorry if I'm teaching grandma to suck eggs on this, but you know, but I think the problem we've got is that kind of initial funding to really kickstart blue credits is really difficult for councils. I mean, we're really cash strapped at the moment, so just getting one project off the ground that would kind of kickstart our blue credit journey, that we could then sell the blue credits on to developers and then reinvest that money back into the system so that we can do more deculverting along the line, because there's loads of places along the Ravensbourne that we could do that work, but it is extremely expensive and problematic for lots of different reasons. And the sort of land ownership issue is always tricky as well, because you might have like 5 different landowners owning a stretch next to the river. So it is difficult, but we've done the work of identifying spots where we could do it. We've worked out how much the biodiversity credits are going to be. We're continuing to work with John on trying to get this kickstarting going. But I think if there was a kind of way that we could have a kickstarting pot that would just launch the journey, we could then be off with this. Because we know that there are developers out there who need these credits, because there are still lots of developments that are happening right on the edge of rivers, and they have to have the 10% uptick, and they just can't get it because they're right on the edge of a bank. And yet in Lewisham, we could actually use that money to massively increase biodiversity in rivers where they could be deculverted. So I think we need more help, I think, getting this going more. And I think we did ask the GLA at one point to be kind of an oversighting body on this. I mean, I don't know how far that's got. John will probably be able to answer that question. It is very complex. It's difficult for councils to kind of get their heads around this stuff. But I do think it's got legs in a way that other biodiversity credits actually is more problematic. I think blue credits, there's more legs in this than actually just the normal biodiversity credits that you get from normal land-based development. And I really, really agree with John with everything he's saying, that this, you know, we really need to unlock a lot of this kind of corporate money that is there, developer money. And also there's like lots of corporate companies now that are desperate to improve their ESG scores. They're desperate to find really, really good quality projects. And I think that GLA could actually front face some of this stuff and help councils kind of make those connections. So yeah, that's my start for 10.
Thank you very much. That's really clear. John, I don't know if you wanted to come in there with any update on that.
Yeah, I suppose I'd just also like to say Lewisham have been restoring rivers long before I was involved with Lewisham. So, you know, they've been doing great work there. Biodiversity net gain is one of the environmental markets. That's what we've been looking at with Lewisham Council and Councillor Scripsky. And we've been looking at that through the London River Bank as a proof of concept. And I do believe that London could use biodiversity net gain to restore rivers. We would also look for the Environment Agency as probably the biggest buyer of biodiversity net gain for rivers in the UK to step up and start investing speculatively in biodiversity net gain, because it is likely that they will have flood defence projects delayed or prevented because they do not have they would have to buy credits, which would be more expensive and not deliver that sort of local offset. So we would really like to see that improved in future. And, you know, just to highlight, there is lots of funding around water in particularly big tech and also food and drinks industries. And I'm even hearing that from banks as well. And, you know, that is particularly within the Thames Basin with the, you know, development of, you know, various aspects there. So I do feel this is a really strong market, and I do feel it's a really strong opportunity, and that, you know, I've been looking at this for about 7 or 8 years, and that market is growing exponentially at the moment. and London could have a really big place if it was proactive around that. We're trying to do that. We're working with councillors like Lewisham, councillors like Enfield, and a number of others, Waltham Forest, and I could name several more where we're looking to do this, but we're doing that as a charity, as an NGO, with the support of the Rivers Trust and, a few others. But we need to think about scale, and that's what I'm continually sort of saying. We need to stop going to proof of concept and start looking at delivering at this at scale. And so any help which can do that, and, I'm obviously talking here from a Thames 21 point of view, and London Riverbank has been led by Thames 21, but this can involve all the NGOs in London, who want to deliver river improvements such, as well as integrating people like Paul, from community groups. It doesn't need to be a single entity which does this. It can be a collaborative thing, and but to do that, we need to get to that scale, and that's where I suppose I'd be asking for help for.
Thank you. Paul, for the final part of the meeting, you mentioned the otters earlier on. How feasible an approach is this? Can the Mayor do it?
What, get otters? Well, they are already there. It's been a bit of a surprise to everyone, really, that what we think are the most urban otters in London have moved onto the Roding, probably coming downstream from up in Essex, but they arrived in Wanstead Park, and then I think they weren't living there. I think they were on a sojourn down to Barking, but I saw them from my boat just before Christmas, just in the river there, which is, to me, a kind of a very beautiful and unexpected sight in Barking. I think what it says is, maybe looping back to what I said at the very beginning, that there are a lot of challenges that our rivers face. Their health hangs in the balance, and making them swimmable by the public will not be easy. But it is very possible. It's doable, because it's already happening. I already swim in the river. The otters are already there. What we need to do is do all of the practical things that all the different people have spoken about today to really extend that, and so we can have more swimmers and hopefully more otters at the same time as well.
And that leads me to my final question, which is the idea of rights to nature. So the river having rights, how should this influence the Mayor's plan to improving London's rivers or improving access to London's rivers?
Yeah, again, I think they are intrinsically linked. Almost all of the rights that we would grant a river would help in this, making it swimmable. Obviously, legally, rights of rivers in the UK are maybe quite a long way off, but I have already designed a declaration of rights to the Roding, the kind of rights that we'd want the Roding to have, and other people and other rivers are starting to adopt that. The other crucial thing is not just the rights of nature, but who is going to look out for those. And for me, one of the reasons that I think the key reason why rivers are in the current state that they are is that they don't have guardians. And by guardian, I mean a person or an organisation holistically looking out for and championing the interests of the river at every single juncture. Sure, we have agencies who maybe enforce bits of it here and there, but no river in London has a guardian, someone speaking for it truly in its interests. And if we are going to make rivers swimmable, I think we do need that guardian. I mean, I've started in a slightly maybe presumptuous way, doing it myself, just for free in my spare time, speaking for the river in every aspect that I possibly can and acting in its interests. And other river guardians around London are starting to do the same. The River Brent is particularly, that's happening there too. But in trying to make it more official, I've put forward a motion to our Catchment Partnership, which is the body that effectively brings all the different organisations dealing with the river together to actually represent the river on the Catchment Partnership, which will be the first time that's been done in the UK, as far as we know, to have a voice of the river on the Catchment Partnership, speaking for its interests and speaking powerfully for the river's interests. That will hopefully be happening this year, and again, hopefully that can go to more rivers and more catchment partners. The final thing is that I think more official organisations should step more into the role of guardianship. What would it be like if the Mayor and the GLA saw themselves as the guardians of London's rivers? But that also, to anyone watching, that you can just do that. You can just decide that you love your river and you will do whatever it takes to peacefully protect it and speak in its interests. And no one can stop you doing that for free. It's just doing it voluntarily. And it's a real way that ordinary people of London can really step up for their rivers and make a difference for them.
Thank you. That's a great note to end on. Thank you very much to both my guests in the chamber and also to Councillor Krupski online. That was really excellent evidence and very much appreciated for our investigation. We've got a few items of housekeeping to attend to, so feel free to leave the chamber or hang out if you're interested in our housekeeping. Can I ask the committee to note the report and the discussion? Thank you. Can we also delegate authority to me as chair in consultation with party group lead members to agree any output arising from this discussion? Thank you. Can I ask the committee to note its work programme? The next meeting of the committee is scheduled for 5th of February 2025 at 10 a.m. in committee rooms 2 and 3 at the City Hall. I have no more urgent business, which concludes today's meeting. Thank you.
This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.